And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
Pathfinder role-playing game Horror Adventures hardcover released at Gen Con, and we would have sacrificed 1,000 goats and blood rituals to get copies if we had to. We did not. They sold it to us.
Right.
As is the tradition on the No Direction Network, when there's a new hardcover out, we like to invite in some guests from the network. Unfortunately, one of the guests was not able to join us due to technical issues, but the other guest is still here. He's joining us. It's the Everman Gamer, Alex Agunas. Welcome, Alex.
Mm-hmm. Hi, thanks for having me, Ryan Param.
Okay, and small hold up. Ryan.
Yes.
You need to not lean into your mic.
Okay.
When you lean in, it overkills, and then it blows it out.
All right.
Excellent. So let's start the episode over again. And
over? Okay.
Yeah. And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
Pathfinder RPG hardcover Horror Adventures was released at Gen Con. And we would have sacrificed 1,000 goats and blood rituals to get copies if we had to. We did not. As is the tradition on the No Direction Network, when there's a new hardcover out, we like to invite some of our bloggers onto the show to join us with the review. One of our bloggers, unfortunately, could not join us after all, but we are joined by the other special guest, the Everman Gamer, Alex Agunas.
Alex!
Hi, Param.
Hi, Alex.
I'm looking forward to apparently brawling with Param tonight, or so he tells me.
Word brawls.
Put 'em up.
Before we get into Horror Adventures, and I'm sorry if the way I say horror is a little strange, it's one of those words. But let's talk about horror as a genre. Wow, what a sentence. Horror as a genre. Alex, as the guest, what does horror mean to you? What are your experiences with it?
Horror is the thing that keeps you up at night, even though you know it's not real. It's what makes you crawl under the covers and say, wow, maybe I shouldn't leave my sweet, tender flesh out in the open in case a vampire comes around. And it makes you say it in 105-degree heat when you really don't want those blankets on your body.
Yeah, that perfectly sums up a really stupid experience I had when I was just staying up late reading Internet Movie Database's trivia about Predator, and then went downstairs and the lights were off and was terrified for no good reason.
That was me for about 3 months after Marble Hornets.
Marble Hornets? What's Marble Hornets?
Oh, Marble Hornets is totally a thing I'm going to have to tell you all about after this episode.
Is it not a horror thing? Is it not perfectly on topic right now?
Oh, no, it is perfectly on topic, but I could rant for hours, and you don't want me to do that.
Okay. Can you at least sum it up? Because I'm too curious to leave it.
It's like the original Slender Man story.
Oh, okay. And it has nothing to do with Marvel Comics, right?
No, Marble.
Oh, Marble Hornets.
Yeah.
All right.
We have at least 3 people in the chat who agree with me that it's good, quite good, so good. Like, it is to date, like, the scariest thing I've ever seen. Like, it's so bad that it made other types of horror just, like, do nothing for me. I was like, my soul is dead. This isn't scary to me. I can tell would have been really scary, but there's just nothing left. It's gone.
Param, how about you? How do you feel about horror?
It is something that is... Gosh, I don't have any profound statements about horror. It's this freaking thing that scared me when I was a kid, and now it kind of just mildly amuses me.
I see. See, as a kid, I had no experience with horror. I just looked at it and, like, it's scary and bloody, and why would I be interested in that at all? And then I stumbled across Nightmare on Elm Street on late night cable one night, and I was super intrigued. And it's like, well, wait a second, there's really interesting things being explored here, and being scared on purpose is kind of fun. And so since then, I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of the genre, but I definitely have an appreciation for it. And every now and then I do like to just see what's new on Netflix, whether it's like a bigger horror movie that I missed or just some small indie thing that might be the next really cool movie. It's kind of fun to be made uncomfortable.
There is one part of horror that will still get to me. horror, really well done horror video games, especially the
Mm.
first person variety, like your Amnesias or your Clive Barkers or oh gosh, Five Nights at Freddy's if you're not ready for it, can totally freak me out, and even more so now that I'm starting to dip my toe into virtual reality, because then it's there and it's real and it's creepy as for.
Yeah, honestly,
just waiting
virtual reality doesn't even need to be horror to be terrifying sometimes.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for them to do like a Pokemon Go style horror game.
They
that's gonna
already
be
have.
done. Oh, have they?
Yes, I forget its
Oh,
name, but it's already out in the world and it's great.
I can't even look into this. I will collapse.
You
I do really bad at horror.
you map out your house and you turn the lights out, and it augment reality's monsters as you look through your phone into your house.
God.
Oh, MG, I can't handle that.
Scott Melville says it's called Pokemon. No, it's not its name. No, Scott, no.
One of my observations about horror, and one of the reasons I hesitate about this book, is that in horror, the heroes are usually not bland, but they're generic. They really have to be, well, they have to be everymen. They have to be the people that anyone can really see themselves in that situation. It's very rare that horror character, like a protagonist in a horror movie, is extraordinary unless they're one of the first people to die. And yet Pathfinder's all about playing the extraordinary characters.
Right, and that's
So
why
I think that's the big hurdle that Horror Adventures has to jump over. It's like, how do you make superheroes afraid?
Yeah, I mean, Mama Ursula is correcting and saying that Night Terrors is the name of the augmented reality cell phone game. But I agree with you. It's really hard to get horror done well in Pathfinder and actually scare players. I accomplish it occasionally. I never get to accomplish it consistently, which is why I'm kind of hoping this book opens up a few of those doors for that to happen. But let's face it, a Pathfinder character is going to go up against things that would any day be their own horror movie if cast on anybody but guys who can smite evil and are immune to fear.
Yeah, that's
And
actually
really,
something.
Go ahead, Alex.
That's actually something I'm running into. I'm planning on running the Strange Aeons Adventure Path at my local store, and I'm like, do I really want paladins in this game? I don't know if I want you to be immune to fear, sir.
Yeah. And these are all issues that this book does cover. It like brings up these topics. I mean, the horror section of the book goes into all of these things and advises you on how to run those things and how to adapt those things. Because Pathfinder, as it sits in the core rulebook, is not suitable to run a horror game.
So then let's start looking into this book, starting with chapter 1, which is horror characters.
Yes.
And right off the bat, the purpose of this book kind of comes into question for me, because it feels like this is a GM's book. It's more like Mythic Adventures than it is like what was the Supernatural Adventures
Occult.
book from last year? Thank you. More than Occult Adventures. Occult Adventures was really chock full of player options. But Mythic Adventures was really a GM book. And Horror Adventures, it feels like it needs to be the same thing. That if it's about scaring the players, you're not going to give them options to be scared. And yet this first chapter about horror characters has weird advice about the player asking the GM about horror options, and it really just feels like this chapter should have been written for GMs, but instead is for players.
This book does seem to be a bit confused as to who its audience is, the players or the GMs, and that's consistent through the entire book. Honestly, in my opinion, this is a GM's book and should have been written as a GM's book, because there are lots of PC options, there are lots of nice ideas, but that stuff could have been broken out into the thing that already is broken out, the player companion line for player that already exists. This is the sort of information that belongs in that book, and this should have just stuck as like an ultimate campaign type. Here you go for GMs, because I don't want my players to read this book, because the stuff I want to use needs to surprise them. If they know the stat blocks on the haunts or the monsters or the templates I'm throwing at them, then they lose a little bit of that edge. And horror is all about not really knowing what you're going up against. That's why I was able to scare the crap out of my players using a serial number file off a couple of games ago. Just when they were uncertain about what they were going up against, it didn't matter that it was just a blasted face spider right out of the bestiary. They were completely losing their lids just because everything's uncertain and it looked creepy, and I wasn't telling them anything they wanted to know about it.
Now, I'm not saying that the horror stuff for players has to be relegated to a player companion, but if you're going to have a chapter that's horror characters and really make it the player-focused chapter, like, I think that's okay. I think you can have a player-focused chapter in a horror book or in a GM book that the GM says, like, here, read these pages, but please don't read anything else. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I don't think this is a player-focused chapter.
No, it's not. It sort of splits itself. It starts off with just like you said, like, talk to your GM, how about how you're going to run the horror game and all that jazz, and then it goes into, hey GMs, here's a new way to run fear, which I like. The new 6-step fear system is kind of neat and kind of helps address some of the problems we already were talking about. And then it says, GMs, hey, you might want to nerf or remove immunity to fear from player options. And it starts talking immediately to the GM in these books. And it's not that it's bad advice, it's just, you're right, it's just not talking to the players. What do you think, Alex?
I personally think that the content is good, but it has a lot of organizational issues, like what you two were saying, where it'll juxtapose sections that are clearly meant for the GM with things that are meant for the player. Like, without getting too much in depth, there's like some great player advice here on like what type of mindset you should have when you're role-playing a character on a horror adventure, like early on in the book. Mm-hmm. You have the aspects of horror heroes section, and it's like, so it's literally talking to the player, this is how you get yourself into this mindset. And then the very next page is the fear rules, but that's addressed to the GM, and then you go a couple of more pages and you start talking about the corruptions, which I'm still not even completely sure who those are addressed to. And then you get to
we skipped the sanity system entirely.
Well, my big thing about sanity is that Chapter 1 has a section on sanity. Chapter 5, Horror Rules, has a section on madness.
Yeah, like, that's a bit of an organization problem.
Why are these not the same chapter? Why do they both have to exist, or could all of this content have been under one of those headers? And I know it sounds a little pedantic, but it really is when we're looking at, do I pick this book up? If you're a player, I don't know. That will be the question that we're constantly asking ourselves.
Yeah,
I mean, a couple of things in these first couple of pages of playing a horror hero before we move on to talking about fear and talking about, because a lot of the stuff in the first chapter is interesting mechanically, but the building horror characters, a couple of paragraphs, is what I would have wanted the entire first chapter or the entire player's chapter to be about. Things like saying, like, you're so used to playing a superhero, why not play a more vulnerable character? Why not explore that? Why not accept that you are not the guy that has the perfect solution for this, and then you have to be clever? Maybe you as a player have to be clever. Maybe your build just has to be clever. And, like, advice on how to challenge yourself in your build to take options you know are suboptimal, or options you've just never taken before because there's the clearly better ones. And that I would have liked to have seen explored. Ways to say, like, yeah, all right, this is not usually the kind of option you would take for a character, but if you did take it, here's some ways you could use that.
One thing that really surprises me, how come drawbacks didn't make a comeback in this book? Like, drawbacks are all about taking penalties that, like, talk about weaknesses and vulnerabilities your character has, but, like, they're completely absent from this book. They're not even mentioned. Like, they're not supposed to be things that are optimal, but they're supposed to be things that make your character feel more realistic. And as anyone who's a fan of the horror genre knows, like, half of that genre is having flawed characters who have fears and weaknesses and vulnerabilities. It seems almost like a missed opportunity in the characters chapter.
Right, because it does even say to have a fear, have a bad reputation, have a problem, but it doesn't give you any mechanical options for that.
Oh, yes. It gives you mechanical options for having fears and phobias in Chapter 5.
Okay, but it's not something that you as the player could be like,
Right.
I am too shaking this option. This is stuff that's like thrust upon you, I guess. It's stuff that you have to experience once the GM has done it.
Right.
Remind me to bring up that topic again when we get to Chapter 5, Perrin, because I have comments about that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do it until we get to Chapter 5.
Right. But I want to also give Alex here a free reign to discuss something that I'm sure he'll want to discuss. Is that I think a good template to see how to run a horror influenced Pathfinder game is the television show Supernatural, who deals with heroes that
Yeah!
that are above the normal but also human and get scared, and like how those
Not
things
only
will
do
balance
they-
around.
Not only do they get scared, but they lose, and they run,
Mhm.
and they regroup, and they try to figure out what they're fighting.
Mhm.
Like, I wrote a third-party product for my company called Paranormal Adventures, where I had a literal, like, 2-page spread talking about just, like, the generic supernatural adventure, like, almost like plot device in terms of like how things are laid out. And it pretty much comes down to like, we're scared, run away, let's figure out how to beat it. All right, now we're gonna go back and beat it. But like, fear doesn't always mean that, or horror doesn't always mean that you're powerless. It means like there's that real sense of dread and uncertainty, and it's all the more satisfying when you overcome it. Like, to me, that's like 80s horror in a nutshell, where it's scary and it's terrifying, but like in 80s horror, people don't always get eaten or whatever.
Well,
I am going to add on to that Buffy is actually a great template for how a Pathfinder horror adventure would go, because you've even got the 4 archetypes. You've got Buffy the warrior, Willow the arcanist, Xander could be the skill monkey, and Giles would be your cleric. And then there's also all these other characters that are kind of part of the group, but that would be like really effective NPCs. And that's a good way to get a PC afraid, is that Buffy may be able to slay 1,000 vampires, but she can't deal with her mom's brain aneurysm. And you just remind people that it's like, yeah, you know what? You made the most powerful character ever. Roll for complicated surgery, Buffy. And there's nothing you can do.
But after all
before-
this,
Just one more thing. I do want to bring up that the book calls out getting player consent quite a few times in the introduction, and is 2 players to each bed, and it talks about planning to be scared and role-playing fear, stuff like that. This is actually a topic I would like to go into in more detail, but I really want to talk about it with Monica, who unfortunately was not able to join us. So I am just going to say that this is definitely a topic we will revisit, but I think it's going to be a topic that we wait until the next time that Monica's on the show. We might even bring her on specifically to have that conversation, because it's too tied into horror to not talk about,
Right.
but I don't want to not talk about it with Monica.
well, let's give it the some at least basic discussion right now, or at least advice. So, but this book leads off with it, and it talks about it in a couple of locations throughout the book, and then all the lead up marketing material and panel discussions, they always lead in with this. This book is designed to introduce elements that is going to make your players uncomfortable at a fundamental level. It's going to mess with every little psychological trick that they can in order to achieve the effect, just like every good horror movie or book. When you're messing with things that fundamental and that base part of psychology, you are approaching the limits of what some people can handle for various reasons. You have no idea what these reasons might be. It might be just a natural phobia, it could be a past life event, and it doesn't matter. We're here to have fun, and anytime you're going to start triggering into these realms or anything, and when we give the proper consent talk, we're going to go into other issues besides the horror that's probably going to be heavily consent oriented. You have to talk it out and understand and have consent, and everyone has to be free to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. Because of all the genres, horror requires the most buy-in. Everyone needs to agree and be comfortable and play in it. They need to not be trying to escape using jokes or other ways of easing off the tension, or else then they ruin it for everybody else. And if you're messing with areas that need sign off and consent and you don't have it, then you don't have that buy-in. You're going to ruin a lot of your good time. You're not going to have a good game, and you might potentially also cross some very bad lines with some of your players at your table.
Right. I think that going back to to Buffy and Supernatural is a great example, because those are two shows that are not constantly doing terrible, horrible things, but because they are horror in nature, not like every single episode. You can have musical episodes, you can have wacky black and white throwback horror episodes, but you are going into that show knowing that any given episode there is the possibility that you're going to see something gross, something terrifying, something that makes you uncomfortable on any given level, and it's not a non-stop thing. And contrast that with Rise of the Rune Lords, which first adventure, yeah, okay, it was like some wacky cartoony violence and whatever, and second one was a little bit of a horror theme, but this wasn't a horror themed adventure path. And by the time you get to part 3, for people know the reputation of the Hook Mountain Massacre, there's just some like over the top unsettling things that are in there that the adventure itself never prepares you for, because it is not in line with the themes. And this was our introduction to what an adventure path is.
Right, and that Hook Mountain Massacre was the first time running a game that I had to have the consent talk with my players. I'm like, hey, we're going to be dealing with some really base level disturbing stuff here. We're going to be dealing with X and X and X issue. We're going to be dealing with stuff that is like talks at base level psychological things that might deal with past trauma. I mean, the stuff that goes on in Hook Mountain, it's famous for it. It's famous for it, and it is so effective at selling those ogres. But if like I was fully prepared to completely neuter that section and to make it just, oh, it's ogres in a lodge, and then go with it, because playing up some of those elements that they discover going through there creeped me out and touched on my personal boundaries of what I was willing to do.
Monica is almost screaming in chat. She wants to participate in this so much. One of the interesting things she says is that television shows also work on pacing to alleviate the tension. And that's true. It's rare you'll get like 2 terrifying things back to back in a show. And that is a skill that horror writers have that a horror GM might not. And so if you are just constantly layering on the uncomfortable, then you might just make the uncomfortable the common. Mm-hmm. And if somebody is particularly uncomfortable about this, you're ruining their day and also ruining your own horror.
And potentially ruining your friendship.
So Monica says that Hook Mountain Massacre is now the line that they will not ever cross again at Paizo. Paizo has said stuff along those lines, but what I like about them including consent in this chapter, which is something they'd never even would have considered doing in like the opening of Hook Mountain Massacre, is that they're not saying this stuff can't exist. You can't have horror. You can't ever play with something if there's potential to make people uncomfortable. It's just being mature about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
as someone who is planning on running Strange Aeons and has the first book, it doesn't get quite close to Hook Mountain Massacre levels, but some of the disturbing scenes like that are in even the first adventure, you're just like, oh, like this is kind of, like I don't even have words to describe it. I can only imagine what Hook Mountain Massacre is like. If that's
not read it, you've not played through Alex. Oh man, I don't want to spoil it for our audience, especially since. But yeah, it's probably the worst adventure I've read for content.
I'll also point out that Hell's Vengeance had authors pass on the opportunity to write it because there's psychologically things that disturb you. This is the evil adventure path that followed Hell's Rebels, and so the things that you had to tell the player, this is what you're doing, this is your goal, made some writers so uncomfortable they were just like, I am passing on this. And Paizo didn't cancel the project. They just said, we completely respect that. Your reasons are your own and we understand them. And then they moved on they offered it to another writer, and it eventually it got released. It exists. It exists in a way that didn't make anybody uncomfortable. Right. Nope, that's probably not true. It didn't make people that said they were uncomfortable. It didn't force them to experience something they didn't like.
Just some of the things they've talked about in Hell's Vengeance has already made me just nope the heck out of running that ever. Even reading some of it is just like, oh gosh, I can't even read the volumes of that one.
Maybe I'm weird, but I would have much rather played the glorious Reclamation freeing Cheliax. But
People
that's just
keep saying that on the boards and stuff. That is a common theme. I mean, I fully expect there to be much fan support for running Hell's Vengeance from the
I mean,
exact
like,
opposite angle.
like when you get right down to it, Cheliax is like Paizo's like shining jewel. Everything that happens in the Inner Sea happens because Cheliax was taken over by House Thrum to a certain extent, at least in the modern era. And because they are so built up as being the quintessential bad guys, like everybody wants the chance to take them down. Everybody wants it, and I don't know if it's something we'll ever actually get meaningfully, because even Hell's Rebels doesn't really take down Cheliax, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, they can't get rid of Cheliax without basically invalidating their entire setting, so...
You know what? The end of Wrath of the Righteous pretty much gets rid of the world wound.
Right, but that's not tied into their entire setting. It's just one of the things. I mean, the Keonan is just as important as that. The Last Wall is just as important as the World Wound. But
right, but
Cheliax
the end
is
of
half
an AP... Yeah, the end of an AP never affects the rest of the line because all of the lines assume that none of the APs have happened. So if they want to do an AP where you just, go up against Abigail Thune and take her down, they could. It just doesn't seem like that's a development space anybody wants to do.
Yeah, and plus
which is a shame. I would love to take her down.
Plus, we already have a proxy of that with Curse of the Crimson Throne. It's not the same.
I'm just going to say we're
I
getting a
guess.
little off topic.
We are totally off topic, and especially since we stopped right before what was probably the flagship sale of this product, the corruption rules.
Oh, we're not talking about fear or sanity?
All right, let's
do we want to do sanity? I like sanity.
Well, okay. Fear and sanity kind of work in the same way in that they take something that is an existing chunk of the rules from the core rulebook, and then acknowledging that if you're going to base entire campaigns around it, these rules are too light. Here's expanded versions. And honestly, I would replace the regular fear rules with the new fear rules in any campaign, not just horror campaigns, because fear goes from like I'm noticing something's awry to I am giving up every instinct as a hero and just dropping my equipment and running. It happens way too quickly. It happens way too often. It's just too binary of an option. Right. So this like escalating dread, I like that. I really appreciate pretty much everything about the fear subsystem that they've introduced.
Now the thing about the fear rules from the core rulebook is they were never meant to be any sort of psychology. They were two things. They were, here's how we solve some very magical effects in which you going from hero to zero was just because you got hit with a spell, or it was just a leftover of simulating the morale rules from back when Dungeons and Dragons was still chainmail in a tabletop war game, and you needed to decide when your freaking spearman decided to run from the ogre.
I wouldn't say this is as robust as introducing a whole morale system to the game. I think this is like morale light, but fear explored.
God, most morale systems are terrible anyway. Save
Sanity,
versus useless.
Yeah. The sanity rules I liked slightly less. It feels like this is ground we've already covered pretty well, and that sanity is more what we got in occult than it is horror related. This does not feel like it was as necessary for this book to really be on topic. They're fine.
It just seems
but
like
it's nothing.
It's a bolt-on to handle the Cthulhu-y stuff when you need to handle the Cthulhu-y stuff. Like, if you're going to run that sort of horror, you need basically brain hit points, which is what this provides. Let's go ahead and describe the system. You add up all your mental scores together, your intelligence, your wisdom, and charisma, and that's your sanity score. Your highest bonus is your sanity threshold, and your sanity edge, which is the other thing you define, is half of your sanity score. And how it works is every now and then something might happen that creeps your character out or pushes them to their limits, and you'll take sanity damage. If it's not enough, if you take more sanity damage in a hit than your sanity threshold, so say you have a 16 in charisma, that plus 3 is your highest. So if you take 3 damage or higher from any instant source, and most sanity damage is tiny, it's just like 1, 2, 1d6 points, things like that, then you will actually get a madness, which is a psychological permanent effect on your character that needs to be addressed and will affect their actions. And now, as long as your sanity is above your sanity edge, half above the top half, you're only getting minor madnesses when that happens. But as soon as you drop below your sanity edge, then you start getting major madnesses. That's where your schizophrenia starts showing up. That's when your dissociative personality disorder starts showing up. These are character debilitating things, not just tics or personality traits that are annoying. These things can be solved, they can be addressed. There's rules for getting counseling, things like that to handle these things. And I do like that they also go dormant, which is a system where your madnesses will go dormant, and then as soon as you suffer another psychological trauma, all your dormant ones just come back. You might have gotten rid of them, but now they're back in full force, along with anything new you just earned. Which is an interesting way to handle it. I actually like this system, especially because of how simple it is, and it's going to be easy to drop into a game should I need to be running things where I need to keep track of psychological elements on my players. So obviously for Strange Eons, I'm going to assume they use this. I haven't read the first volume. It sounds like this is...
It's not in there.
It's not?
It
sounds like it was made for that book.
I mean, you can if you want, but it doesn't specifically tell you to use it. Strange Ions is actually pretty good at standing alone from, at least Volume 1 is pretty good at standing independent and alone from horror adventures, which is actually kind of refreshing.
It's refreshing but odd, because Horror Adventures I always thought was supposed to be the support book for that.
So Scott Melville has an interesting question in chat that I just want to cover right now. He asks if there's any more madnesses, because there's only like 6 in the other books, he says. There is the madness section, which is like 150 pages later in the book. And there are 16 madnesses. Some of them are the same madnesses we've seen before, but it's been reformatted. They're formatted a little bit more like traps now, or a little bit more like poisons. So the other debilitating things that you come across as a character, it's now in that format and goes into a little bit more information. And Monica is asking if anyone else lost video. Well, let's see how this plays out.
If anybody loses video during a Twitch chat, just refresh the page. That's usually what fixes it. Twitch is notorious for that.
Monica says Monica apparently also lost audio, so she didn't hear that.
Well, that's sort of all the things then. Sorry, Monica.
She lost audio.
Oh no.
She doesn't know.
I just told her in
crying
Facebook. Don't worry.
Fun.
All right. Corruptions. Are we ready to talk about corruptions?
Let's get into the corruptions.
Totally ready.
Because this is, like I said, this was the banner line. This is the thing they pitched when they pitched this book. This was everything they talked about at first about the book whenever they were coming up in any talks or panels. And now we're in it. This is how the players were supposed to interact with the Horror Adventures.
May I?
Go for it, Alex.
Go ahead.
You get lead on this.
Okay, so there are 11 corruptions in the book. All of them have one of the iconics being horrifically transformed as their kind of tagline. And the basic idea for corruptions is that something bad happens to you, and the stronger you get, the more... there's a picture of the iconic monk being turned into a ghoul, one of the better ones and the fun ones. But the idea is that something bad happens to you, and as long as you can manage to keep fighting off the badness, you can get benefits from your corruption and not really lose yourself to the dark impulses. But corruption gets bad really, really quickly. Basically, when you're first corrupted by the catalyst, the thing that transforms you into a corrupted creature, you start at a corruption level of 0. And every time something bad happens to you, as defined by each unique corruption, you have to make some sort of saving throw. And if you pass, you're hunky-dory. But if you fail, your corruption stage will advance, or the opportunity to advance will happen. And when you've advanced 3 times, usually something awful happens to your character that involves you either dying or permanently losing your character to the GM. And every step of the way, you get more and more penalties. You get more and more powers. But then, even as you get those powers, it's power with a price, which causes you to take stains on your character. So, like, maybe you'll grow claws, but those claws stain you with an inability to get rid of them, which means it's really difficult for you to use your hands for things. Every corruption is like this. It gives you cool benefits, but it also takes away from you. The overall idea is that most people probably aren't going to want to be corrupted for very long. There are some that are going to want to indulge, and there's a variant rule system for what's called useful corruptions. It's kind of like your Blade Runner. I am a Dhampir. I can walk in the day. I'm a day walker. But most people who get corrupted, bad stuff is going to happen, and you want to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's Blade, not Blade Runner.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Blade.
It's all right. I was like, Blade Runner? Where's he going with that?
I think they referenced when you're running that version of the rules, it's the Monster Squad.
Yeah,
Yes.
basically.
No,
But I mean, like,
Monster Squad is a bunch of kids fighting monsters.
oh, is that the movie that's like really, really dark and edgy for a kids movie?
Yeah, it starts okay, and then takes a dark turn, like about in the third act.
It's not Stranger Things dark. It's just like, I mean, it's kind of similar in tone to the Goonies. It's just the 80s had
Everybody
a lot
survives
more
the
movies.
Goonies.
Everyone survives Monster Squad.
No, they don't.
Disagree.
Well, talking about survival, one thing that's interesting about corruptions is that the rate at which you gain powers and things advance is pretty much up to the GM. Like, there's a guideline saying that players should get a power roughly every odd level. That's totally what it says. But
that's not the part I'm
other level.
disagreeing
It's just
on.
the example says every odd
Yeah.
level.
yeah, it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It says, it's etc. That's odd levels.
Mhm.
No,
But
that's
it
not-
also
Not telling you that's the system. It's telling you this is one way you could do it, but it's not forcing you to do it every odd level. You can
Yeah.
start at level 4 and do it every
Yeah,
other
that's-
level.
that's what I said. Like, it doesn't say you have to, but there is a guideline, and so you can kind of pick how they come out. You can even pick whether your players get like the bad effects before they get the good effects. Like, it's a really flexible system, but it's totally in the GM's court. And so to me, like, this is a GM system that gives the players power that they didn't ask for.
Right.
So, like, for me, as I even mentioned this in my blog article, I don't think that this is a system that, as a player, I would even try to build around. It would be something that would just happen to me, and either I would try to learn and make the best of it, or do whatever I could to get rid of these things before I turn into, like, a killer robot or something.
And
In chat, Hill Giant 2 makes the comparison corruption levels are like mythic levels. And it's true in that it's a separate advancement track. It's not the same because mythic levels have a little bit more format to them, whereas, like you were saying, Alex, this is very much a GM fiat system. But yeah, it's not a comparison I had made, but I get it. I see what you're saying.
But they talk about it being a GM system and a lot of under the GM, and then like it says that they'll have to face these saving throw rolls as they go down the track, or things happen to them, and it says that. But usually these are long periods of time between these rolls. They're supposed to be thing. But then when you get into the section, this is where I have my problem with it. That's not true. When you actually start reading it into like the progression system on each one of them, this is the part that is not explicitly said it's GM fiat. This is like, this is what happens, and this is when you need your saving throws. Now, of course, the GM can alter it, but as written, this is just supposed to be how you run those things. And the math on that is such that if anybody survives more than a couple of months, I am surprised. Because they are, the saving throws are hugely high. It's 15 plus your rank plus half your character level, which is a 50-50 shot on average if it's your good save. And a lot of times
it's 15 plus your manifestation level.
Yeah. Which in your manifestation
is
level
half
is
your
equal to the number of powers.
And,
yeah.
And if
So-
you get them, okay, so it's gonna be 15 plus half your level because that's when you're gonna get your manifestation ranks unless you're shutting them down.
Okay.
But and they happen frequently depending on the thing. You have to, like the ghoul, if you're not eating sentient flesh daily, after a week you have to make the roll. And werewolf, if you're not killing people monthly, you have to make the roll. And every time that you do something to prevent yourself from doing that, you lock yourself in the cage, you starve yourself with the ghouls, you keep yourselves from doing anything with the vampires, you don't drink people. It stacks the save. It gets +1 on your next one, and then that stacks infinitely. So it's guaranteeing you're going to fail these rolls eventually.
Yeah, deep one have to spend an hour per manifestation level in salt water.
Right.
Like that's most of your adventurer day, and if you're just on an adventure, unless you're carrying a bathtub with you full of salt water, like it. This I agree with you, Param. This is where I was just reading it, and I'm like, so this is not some fun you can have for a couple of levels until things get really bad. Things are going to get really bad really quickly.
Right. And the thing is, it's just the saving throws the DCs are just too high for what if you're intending for this to be a long effect that's going to tempt a character over the whole course of his lifetime during a campaign, where you're constantly tempting him to make those rolls harder, and then him role playing around how it's going. That's not what's going to happen with the Accursed template. The Accursed template is, oh, this week you didn't horribly hurt somebody and have to get your save. Well, good luck. Next week you're going to have to do it 1 higher, and then the week after that 1 higher, and basically guaranteeing within a couple of months your character is an NPC. So you're going to be a lot of GM fiat on that to make that anything close to what was on the sticker.
Yeah, I think basically every progression has that same issue. I can't think of one that was like, okay, that will actually last an entire adventure. That 15, it's 15 as the starting roll. Like that's less than a 50% save.
Oddly
most
enough,
of the time.
vampirism is pretty easy to live with, as long as you're dead certain you can lock yourself up. Werewolf is doable.
Yeah, like one thing I want to say, like. The language isn't always super clear on these. Like for werewolf, it's whenever the full moon happens, you have to make a save, and if you fail that save, then you can be restrained. But it's only when you're restrained because you failed your initial save that the next DC goes up.
Right, but if you failed your save and go hunting, you go down the corruption path.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to restrain yourself anyway, because that's the only way you're going to guarantee that you don't go down the ladder.
But wait, all right, so the first save where like if you pass, then you're fine, and if you fail, you go hunting and try to kill someone to advance your save. If you pass that first save,
you're fine.
It doesn't you can still be restrained, but the DC's not going to go up. The DC only goes up if you fail the first save and then you're restrained afterwards.
Right.
So it's like if you keep failing and your allies stop you from going out, it keeps going up. But the thing is, as long as your allies have a way to continuously stop you from going out, the DC is going to keep going up. Yeah. But as long as they can manage to keep you in check, you're not going to go murdering people.
Well, that's why I said that werewolf was. So that's why I said werewolf was one of the doable ones. But if you go to Accursed, it's not.
Accursed totally is not.
You can't survive Accursed.
Yeah, the only thing
my issue then is that this is kind of like Mythic in that if there's one person in the group, it completely throws everything off, because then everyone has to be watching that one guy. If everyone in the party has some kind of whatever these are called, corruption, it feels like half of the adventure will just be dealing with whoever's turn it is to be freaking out right now. It's really unfortunate how this progression section of every single one ruins what's otherwise a really fun concept and some really fun options with some amazing writing.
Well, I already have my house rule in effect on how I'm going to fix this. And it is,
go on.
Okay, so here, you don't make those saves automatically. Period. Like, at no point in time does something automatically make you make these saves. You will make those saves anytime you accept. When the GM hands you the cookie and you eat the cookie, then you make your 15 plus blah save. And then you will also make your save anytime you give in to the corruption and like act out that part of it in character. So if you do go crazy and go hunting in the woods as a werewolf and eat somebody, then yeah. But or if you do give in to the accursed thing and like horribly abuse somebody, then yeah, you're going to make your save right then. But otherwise, I won't force the saves until they accept one of the temptations. That way, it is what they were pitching at the panels when this was coming up. It's like it's a give and take. It's like, hey, here, do you want it? You want it? You want it? You sure you want it? Because that's the part that this is exciting for me. This whole we're just going to time down the egg timer here, and sure, you can keep accepting these things and then just basically burn your bridge behind you, making the saves impossible to pass.
I mean, so like one thing that I think could have been handled better is I don't think that stain should have been tied to the manifestation powers, because it makes those powers look less tempting, because every power has a bad side. If the stains were instead tied to your corruption level, as in every time you fail, you get all of these bad things slapped on your character, and it's you failing at maintaining the corruption that penalizes you, rather than actually just having the power, then that would have been more along the lines of the whole like corrupting, like the temptation aspect. At least that's my thoughts on it.
I didn't have a problem with how stains work, but I think I might be sold on your way, Alex, especially if there's like when I was reading the outline of how corruptions work before we even got to the first one, the corruption progress, I was expecting there to be about 10 stages. So when it got to the third one, and the third one it's already happened. Like it's not three strikes you're out. It's not like 3 and then the next time you fail, you're done. It just seemed like this progresses really quickly. So in your way, where it's like you're gradually gaining more of these stains, that's a lot more interesting to me, and a lot more what was on the back of the package, back of the label.
And let's not dismiss how horrible it is to even fail the first time, because these things don't. The corruption levels aren't just a track and then you're done. It's the first time you fail, you get shifted one step towards evil, and then also some horrible stuff happens to your character on top of the stuff that already happened to your character. Well, not all of them's towards evil, but almost all of them are towards evil. Some of them are towards a very specific on evil, and only like a couple of them are towards a different alignment. But they all end in when you losing your character. So once you fail the first one, then suddenly your character buys in, and so you have to start role playing him or her as going towards that sort of thing. So that's going to make it all that faster that you're going to hit your next save that you're going to fail. Not fail, but you're going to start triggering more of them over and over again, because once your alignment shifts from good to chaotic neutral, and then from chaotic neutral to chaotic evil at stage 2, your character's not going to have a problem with it anymore.
Are stage 1's really that bad? Because you start at 0.
Start 0. The stage 1 is instantly for basically more than half of them. Stage 1 is shift one step towards evil. And then stage 2 is you are now evil.
I did not realize it was that. Yeah, you're right. It does happen quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And then stage 3 is give the GM your character sheet. You're done.
Yeah. Scott Melville has an interesting suggestion. A GM could use corruptions to make a quiet or less RP-involved character more of a focus of the campaign.
I don't know if that's a good idea in my experience, because usually trying to force RP on quiet people is sort of like taking away their own consent. Like if they wanted to be involved, they would be. At least that's my experience. But
I was also going to use the consent consent as one of the reasons not to do that. But so quiet, I'll agree. Less RP involved, yeah, all right. But some people do actually need that extra little kick, or they just kind of want to feel like there's something extra special about their characters. I think that there is some potential there. But the other way I think a GM could use corruptions is to make a recurring NPC more interesting every time you see him. So first time you see him and it's just like you think he's wearing stone gloves, and the next time you see him it's like, no, you're pretty sure his entire arm is stone, and then by the end of it you're just fighting a golem that seems to know you guys very well, and that's because it was that NPC that you fought early on in the campaign. And maybe even you could talk about how the last time you fought him, you were pretty sure you killed him, but now his chest where you stabbed him to death has been completely replaced with stone flesh. So it's like this guy is upgrading specifically to get you.
Now, I want to talk about the consent issue on this one, even though we said we were going to do consent. Because in a role playing game, players have control over exactly one thing, and that's their character. And there's often some player surrogacy there, where very rarely is a character that sits at my table not in some way highly influenced by the player who's playing that character. There's some self identity there, and people get attached to these characters. And the game does have, just vanilla, ways in which the character, the how you play the character will change, not up on your choices. But if you look at generic Pathfinder, it's always like this was a spell effect, and you have like saves and there's cures and you have ways to deal with it that are pretty laid out, or it's like an alignment slip or a code of conduct break, and even then you get warning. Yeah, Mama Ursula says player agency. That's exactly what this is. And then even then you get warnings. You like, hey, hey, if you keep this up, then this thing's going to happen. With this system, you will a lot of these steps take a lot of that agency away from the player, a lot of that control away from what they're able to do, and it's not at all. There's no, even if there's warnings, there's no control. The player doesn't get to choose a lot of this. In fact, a lot of the system is things happening against their will, and then things like their alignment majorly shifting can ruin a character, how and the fun the player is going to have with that character. So if there's not buy-in for this, then don't use it.
It does remind me, like, in 3rd edition, I was playing a Hexblade, and I had, like, that weird Jinxie familiar. And this was when we were rotating GMs, and Matt just decided to make my familiar, like, intelligent and sentient and kind of smack talky. And I lost all interest in that option. And, yeah, it's the GM. GMs are supposed to have control over everything, but it's weird when you no longer recognize your character because the GM has made choices for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's an issue with that's not the failing of the system; it's the feature of the system. So, like that is explicitly on the cover on this one, and that's another big reason why consent is one of the first thing it talks about. But like if your players aren't comfortable with this, don't use it. Like really, don't surprise your players with this, because it will ruin characters. They will hate it. They will dislike the game. They will leave.
You don't have to specifically say what your plans are. Mm-hmm. But you can just bring up at the beginning of the campaign, I'm interested in the corruption mechanics. If it feels like, if it naturally fits into where the campaign is, does anyone object to using it?
Mm-hmm. And you better tell them that corruption mechanics means that they will lose some of the agency of their character, because that is exactly what happens. Like as soon as they even start, they start getting the urges.
That's true. Even Strange Aeon says in the player's guide that like the game assumes that you're gonna have amnesia. Like be okay with that. Like you're gonna not have control over everything your character is and does during that time period. Right. So how do you guys feel about the alternate racial rules in this book?
They're kind of cool. You don't like them?
There's a lot of missed opportunity here.
Oh, okay. I wasn't looking at them for missed opportunities. I usually don't expect anything out of these alternate racial rules, especially when they're not in a race book. Like Intersea Races and the race guide. Forget the name of that book. What was the name of the race book? The other race book.
Advanced Race Guide.
Advanced Race Guide. Thank you. In the Advanced Race Guide, you can tell how often I crack the cover on that one.
So, like, for me, this section has a lot of lost potential because it only focuses on core races.
Oh.
And, like, the core races are not horrifying, and not many of these traits do much to make them horrifying. I would have liked it much better if it was like, hey, well, we have a Deep One hybrid race in Bestiary 5, and we have a Deep One corruption. Let's do some Deep One hybrid stuff. Or, hey, we have a Dhampir race from Bestiary 2 and a, wonderful vampire corruption. Let's do some Dhampir stuff. Or, hey, we have a Skinwalker race in Bestiary 5 and Lycanthropy as a corruption. Let's do some of that class. It's like, I don't know. I'm there. So much is done with the core races, and they're not really all that scary. Like,
No.
I would have preferred to just not have seen this section, or to have it taken in a different like way. This to me is just kind of boring.
Well, it's not even that. There's like a couple of them that are actually meant to make a player more in line with the horror theme, like Zerg Titan mentioning the creepy doll halfling is one of those options. But a lot of these options are the opposite. These are like ways to steal a character against some of the horrific elements. It's like fear bonuses and prevention from bleeding and things like that.
But that shouldn't be a racial trait. That should be a regular trait, or a character option, or a feat, something you grow into as an individual, not something that your race is just naturally good against. But that's just my opinion. I wasn't pleased with this section.
I didn't have any problems with it, but then again, it didn't excite me.
The rules are, you know what? The rules are fine. Like, mechanically, everything's sound and cool. I don't think it fits the theme of the book. But that, again, that's just my opinion.
Now, after we do
Moving
the
on.
race traits,
Go ahead.
We get into the archetypes, and the archetype.
Monica wants us to call out this this art right here.
Okay.
The chapter 2 header.
Yes.
Yeah,
Why are
it's
we calling
awesome.
out that one? It is awesome, but
Because it's awesome.
okay.
It's
I totally like
it's
awesome
the
stuff.
it's the iconic occultist fighting Deep One hybrids and drawing the Elder Sign in the air. Like, you can't get more like Lovecraftian than that.
Good point. It is cool.
Oh, Monica says I'm wrong. I didn't call out the thing she wanted to call out.
Okay, then what do you want to call out?
I don't know. Occultist art.
It could be in the occultist section of the archetypes. Anyway, so Alex, can you take the lead on what's so cool about the archetype chapter?
So, I like this archetype chapter, man. I really like this chapter because it doesn't stick to the idea that archetypes are for players. There's a lot of things that, like, you look at it as a player and you're like, I would never want to play this. But then you look at it as a GM and you're like, oh, think of the horrible things I could do with this archetype. I really like that about this section.
It's about 1 to 3 or 1 to 2. There's every class has about 3 archetypes on average. One of them is good for a player that's going to fight horror elements, and the other 2 are horrible, horrible, horrible people.
And I'm perfectly okay with that. We did go into this expecting it to be more of a GM book, and archetypes are actually a great way to add GM options without it just being monsters or without it having to be some kind of, like actual rival book. This just turns a class that is designed with things like bravery and, I don't know, just a general sense that these are the people that are actively going out there and going on adventures, options that are useless for the people that are just kind of sitting in their cave and machinating. So this just replaces heroic archetypes with villainous class features. It seems perfectly in line with what a GM will need to make a villain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are some great archetypes, man.
Yes, there are.
Well, this, beyond anything else in the book, this is design space that the design team does not get to play with too often, and this is the perfect book to do it. So this is the first time they really got to unleash the idea of what an evil druid is, what an evil inquisitor is, and especially the occult classes, which really have not had a whole lot of options, but are perfectly, like, as far as companion themes, occult and horror, those work perfectly together.
Oh, there's so many good ones. There's like the Elder Mythos cultist. You worship Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm.
And the de-evolutionist, where you get a de-evolved humanoid as your animal companion. I love that. That is so twisted.
The Dreadnought Barbarian, you're freaking Jason Stalker right there. He's dead calm while in his rage. He has a steady gait. It's just like when you want your horrific, super beefy killer type, he gets to be the barbarian and silent.
It's true. There's the Living Grimoire Inquisitor who literally hits people with the Holy Book.
Yes,
I love that one. Like that's not even like as scary as Yeah, like that's not like a villainous. That's just a player. It's great. I was joking that the best thing you could do would be to play a living grimoire of Abadar or a living grimoire of Asmodeus and just hit people with the law. I,
I also like that the medium doesn't get any archetypes, but all of the medium spirits have their like evil opposite. So instead of the Archmage, you get the Lich. Instead of the Guardian, you get the Terminator. Instead of the Hierophant, you get the Heretic.
and the
It's fun
Butcher
that-
instead of the Champion.
Yep.
Butcher. That's interesting because at least as a designer, this is the first time that I know of that a mechanic from a player companion made the jump into a hardcover rulebook. Because Legendary Spirits are from Occult Origins, if I remember my book correctly. So like this is actually the first time I've ever seen that happen. I was like, oh, cool.
Is it
I'm-
word for word, or is this taking that concept and adding new, like expanding on
Oh,
it?
it's not a reprint of the mechanics. Like, and actually it might be in Occult Realms, but in Occult Realms or Adventures, you summon Nex to be as your spirit, like the Arch Lord Nex. So this is just taking that and adding more general options, but it's kind of nice to see when everything like works together so nice and pretty. I like the kineticist talents that put a voice in your head. Yeah,
Mama Ursula
prob-
wants us to call out the gingerbread witch, who gets a gingerbread familiar and eats
and
people.
and then eats people. So this is a good time to point out that this book is hilarious because it's the first hardcover rule book that I know of where half of the archetypes are not allowed in Pathfinder Society.
Yeah, like, oh man. Also, like, I guess did we call out the serial killer because that's one of the more obvious ones.
Yeah, the serial killer is great.
Yeah, you're a vigilante, but your alternate identity is a serial killer. Perfect for GMs to use all over. And the art is like a killer halfling.
Yeah. There is a lot of really great paladin archetypes too. I was surprised. Paladins don't normally get like outstanding archetypes, but like you have the martyr who loses a lot of the paladin's defenses, but instead bleeds from wounds on their body, and those wounds inspire their allies like a bard's bardic performances. Or you have the tortured crusader who's basically the Dark Souls main character who has like, you know, instead of charisma, he's a wisdom-focused, grizzled crusader, and he runs around, and he's not good at detecting evil as much. It has to be a little more careful, but he's really self-sufficient and has more skill points. It's such a cool archetype.
Paladin is also the only
love
class
that
that goes 3 for 3, useful for player characters. Like, none of those
It's
were designed
true.
to be NPCs.
I mean, they probably could have done an anti-paladin archetype if they wanted to, but after a certain point, you would just want to make a whole section for anti-paladins, and I guess there wasn't space for
I
that.
mean, that's what the Blackguard's for.
That's true. Gingerbread Witch. So wonderful. I like that there's a wizard that's just really good at summoning Cthulhu.
Yeah, because what do you want in your back pocket? Cthulhu! Like, actually, there's a whole lot of that. There's a lot of support for being a wizard or a cleric and saying, I want more tentacles around here.
And it's usually not a good idea.
No, not a good idea.
No.
So,
So-
overall, I was really happy with the archetypes.
Yeah, the archetypes are great. Like they're fun, they're interesting. It's refreshing to see GM oriented archetypes, but there's enough for players here that it's a really good section.
Okay, next section's the feats.
Oh,
Sorry, guys. Just to let you know, I'm having a terrible nosebleed that just
That's
started
why
out of
we were
nowhere.
totally just like letting that play out over there. Ryan,
Just letting you know what's
super
going on.
important that you hide that from the camera. That's against Twitch rules to show that.
All right, well, I think I have.
Yes, good job.
So let's talk about feats and why the feat section is awesome. I love this feat section too.
Wait, what? You love
Oh, I
this feat
love it.
section?
It's so good.
Okay.
All right.
I want to hear the pitch on this one. I thought it was
They-
a whole
they-
bunch of missed opportunities.
Oh no, they made monster feats a thing, and they're all so cool.
Okay, I like the monster feats. Okay.
Like, oh my gosh, there's the one, and like the art to go for it is great. It's the one where when you shape change, instead of just magically changing, you rip your old body off, and it's disgusting.
Gruesome
I
shape
love-
change. Let me get the art for that up on the camera
Aw.
because it is
I
that is disturbing, Okay, here's the art for gruesome shape change.
I'm also
Oh,
going to point
it's
out
so
that's
great.
Husk from Generation X, an obscure Marvel character. That's her superpower.
That's also
Ugh.
every shapeshift. That's every doppelganger in Supernatural. All
Oh,
of
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
All of them. Like, it's great. I love it. There's things like if you swallow a creature whole and that creature dies inside of you, it has to make a save or it gets negative levels and is eventually reduced to dust, like disintegrate. That's awesome. Like, oh my god, I want to get out of this creature's stomach so bad. And I love the spell-like ability meta magic feats. There's a series of monster feats that only monsters can take unless you have GM permission to do otherwise, where you can apply meta magic to your racial spell-like abilities. And it's so cool, and I love that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that really stuck in my head. I'm a fan of the chitin style, where it lets monks use the spike chain and like beat people with spikes.
Yeah, I like the cotton style. I like the brute style. But the problem I have is all four of the style feats are monk only again, or equivalent to monk only.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Oh,
I
because of
just
the key
I hate that
prerequisite?
that's well, it's improved unarmed strike or key or basically, are you a monk or a monk-like object? Then these are
I thought
feats for
these ones.
you.
Oh no, they do. For some reason, I thought these ones didn't have improved unarmed strike. Yeah, you're right. It's
They all
improved
did.
unarmed
I
strike.
went and
on all
double
three of them.
checked, like, because I was like, oh man,
Kite-
some of these could be cool, but
Chitin style doesn't. Chitin style needs exotic weapon proficiency spike chain.
and a key.
Still needs a
Man.
key pool though.
Oh, that's true. Oh, that means brawlers can't use it. That's a missed opportunity.
Is there a brawler archetype that has a key pool?
As far as I know, no. You would have to go like 2 levels of ninja.
Make it happen.
The one thing
I just got ordered.
the big thing, like the generic feats, or I say the generic feats, but the ones that aren't monster or storyline feats or style feats, they're all pretty cool. There's things like how you eat ghosts and absorb spirits and have cool rituals and very, very horror themed elements. But the big missed opportunity is none of these feats tie into the corruption rules. They could have mitigated or enhanced a lot of the corruption rules if there were like feats that like helped you embrace it or pass your saves better or altered how you did things or things like that. And there's no support. Like the corruption rules exist on those 22 pages and then disappear entirely for the rest of the book.
There's a
Like
couple
you
spells.
could have had an amateur Promethean.
You're right. There are a couple of spells that make your saves easier on your corruption or suppress the corruptions or steal manifestations, but that's in the spell section. So you're right. There are some spells that do it, but the feats chapter completely ignores them.
I agree with you that having feats that did something that would have been better.
But
Because that way it's not like, you want your big burly fighter to be able to ward off the corruption, not need to worry about the wizard casting the spell.
or you could just like go like rules just to help you like embrace it without like going all the way down the track or something,
Yeah.
I'm gonna call attention to Aura Flare because there's not someone I know. Like I've never had somebody that's new to the game playing a cleric or a paladin, finding out they have an aura, being all excited, then finding out it does nothing. So having a feat that at least means having an aura gives you some kind of option.
Yeah. I thought
Like
that was
that.
really cool too.
That's design space that has been unrepresented for far too long.
So any more thoughts about the feats?
I'll give Brutal Coup de Grace a shout out because
just good gross.
so this I like it. It's a simple feat and yet it completely dictates the tactics that a player in the group will have, and everyone else will have to keep reminding them to at least keep one person alive. But yeah, it's you deliver a coup de grace with your selected weapon, kill the target, and enemies within 30 feet of you who can see or hear make a will save or become shaken. Not the most wonderful effect, but really, like I was saying, what it changes, how it affects the entire tactics of your party. I like that. I like that when something simple can just re-flavor your entire group.
Is it bad that I really like...
I know how to say coup de grace properly.
I thought it was.
Is it bad that I...
It is not coup de grace. Coup is chin, coup is hit, and gras is fat, grâce is grace. I don't know why people got the idea that like there are silent S's in French. There's no silent CE. It's a coup de grâce.
Coup de grace.
And anyone that says coup de grâce is being like snooty and wrong.
Interesting.
Take the French speaker up for his word on it, folks. But anyway, I really like the stubborn curse feat. The one that's like if you curse someone, they have to roll twice on the checks to remove it and use the worst.
Oh.
I like it conceptually. In play, I've just seen curses be like they already linger so much and they could be so debilitating.
Oh, we're going to get to the curse section soon. A whole section of this book dedicated to making curses suck more.
Oh,
Yeah,
listen.
curse needed a spell making it harder to get rid of them.
Listen, I think it totally did, and it exists, and it's going to be so great. I might be saying this because James just got cursed in Reign of Winter.
Mm-hmm.
James had a very rough time in Reign of Winter, actually. He went from being blinded to getting permanently blinded to being cursed in the very next combat. So,
Spells.
what about the next section? Spells and rituals, right?
Okay, so how I would sum up the spell section. These are spells you can cast. It's a bad idea to cast them.
Okay.
A lot of
I
them
like-
are evil.
Actually, since you bring that up, then there is a nice chart on, or sorry, not a chart, a sidebar
Mm-hmm.
on casting evil spells.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that has ever really been addressed. It's, evil is just a descriptor, and it's not really advised. Some classes are specifically banned from using it, but otherwise it's really just like, yep, this is technically an evil spell.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of almost making it its own form of corruption, that it's, yeah, all right, if you really need to, if you have no other option, you can animate dead and have that skeleton protect some innocent people from a horde of bad guys. You are using evil against itself. Not a good tactic, but not the most evil.
Mhm.
But if that becomes your go-to tactic, you've been corrupted, you are not realizing what terrible dark energy you are bringing to the world, you become a bad person.
Now, this little paragraph that you just pulled out has been a humongous controversy on the forums everywhere, where like
Yep.
a lot of people do not like this little call out. Even I don't like it a little bit because I think it's because it's 2. That's what they say the number is now, 2. You cast 2 evil spells and you go evil. I'm like, that seems like way too quick to go evil. But
Does it say 2?
yeah, casting 2 evil spells is enough to turn a good character non-good, and 3 more will turn them evil. So
Typically.
yes, typically. And that's fast.
And I mean, what?
That's like an afternoon for a cleric. I mean, well, not a cleric. That's an afternoon for a wizard or a sorcerer.
So I can't help but feel like I'd have to do the math and check the system. I feel like it would have made more sense to tie it into the. Do you remember the sliding alignment bar system from Ultimate Campaign?
Right.
Where like that, because I mean, even then that would have given you like 5 or 6 before you turned evil. Like
5 is what I would have said.
Well, 5 is to go from good to evil, but 2 knocks you out of good. But even then, using the Ultimate Campaign alignment system, that's 9 steps to get to there, and then 9 more steps to get to evil on the slider bar.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, it's an interesting idea, and it's a cool thing, and it maybe even 2's fine if you're running a horror game and you really want to play up the angle of don't do that, for that will forever taint your soul type things, and then you can have like, the dramatic turn as the trusted NPC that they were relying on has to do this thing, and then, oh look, I'm evil now.
sounds like Param wants to twirl some mustaches.
Yes. And but yeah, I would. But if you're going to be doing complicated, nuanced alignment stuff, there are other better systems than just 2 evil spells being gone.
Can we take a minute to address the absolute best spell in this chapter, though?
Okay, what is the best spell this chapter?
Hold on, I just want to address Scott Melville's comment. He's saying, doesn't it also apply good spells and evil characters? Yes, it does. At the end of the sidebar, it says, though this advice talks about evil spells, it also applies to spells with other alignment descriptors.
So now it's just oh good. So
Yeah.
cast 2 spells to get to neutral, then you cast to
Yeah.
Sanctuary a couple of times to get yourself right back up to good again, and yeah, seesaw your way.
You can murder a person a day as long as you cast 4 spells with good descriptions.
Well, actually, you could murder a person a day and then go murder an evil person with a good spell. So you could kill 2 people and just not have your alignment changed. Listen, this is called pragmatic killing, Brian. You got to get used to it.
This is why I think it's
But,
a bad idea to codify this stuff anyway.
I agree. But anyway, the best spell in this book, in my opinion, is Green Caress.
Oh, not what I thought you were going to say. All right. What
I
is
love-
great about Green Caress?
It's basically the Troll 2 spell. It's wonderful. It's so wonderful. You cast it on someone, and they slowly turn into a plant creature.
It's
and
a
so
good
then
one.
you can get. It's great. I love it. I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I can turn my players into plants and have little plant-eating creatures eat them. It's wonderful.
Mama Sutra says the best spells are Death Clutch and Decapitate. Both good
Wow.
spells. My call for best spell is the one right after Decapitate, which is Decolate. Or Decolate. I have no idea how to spell this. Or to say this. Decolate? Or Decolate?
Yes,
Anyway.
it's a Latin.
You take your head off intentionally.
Yeah, decollate. It's like collate, like collating paper, but decollate.
Well, that makes sense.
You decollate your head from your body. You lose sight. The head's dead. You gain blind sense, and then DR2 and immunity to decapitation effects, or any sort of things that need you to have senses. And then you get to just run around like that, all creepy like. And then you get to put your head back on and kind of hope nothing happened to your head while you were, not using it.
So, I have two questions.
Mhm.
Number one, Ryan.
Yes.
Did you think my favorite spell was going to be Quick Change?
Nope. I thought your favorite spell, especially because we were talking about evil spells, was going to be Damnation.
That's a really cool spell. I like Quick Change. I'll let you talk about Damnation. I don't know about you guys, but I've read Maze of Madness and Suffering, and I could not help but think of Cosmo.
No.
Paizo Cosmo.
Sure.
Because rolling a 1 or 20 traps you in a horrific nightmare circus.
Yes.
That's totally Cosmo. 100%. Do you know what he would like erase the chart, and just every result would be more nightmare clowns.
I like content. I like the various contact entities, this is going back to the, hey, I want more tentacles around here. The art is Ezrin pulling down some Migos.
Not realizing the terrible, terrible choice he just made.
Yeah, seriously, this is not a good idea. But that's why I said a lot of these are just like, you could cast these spells. You probably don't want to.
So the reason I mentioned that it's a really bad idea, listeners, is that when you cast Contact Entity, it's really more of a beacon. It doesn't actually summon them. Like, they just come to the spot you're at.
Mhm.
And then once they're there, they do whatever they want.
Yeah.
like you summoned all of those Migos,
Right.
and they're just going to do what they want now, which is probably take you as a wonderful science experiment.
Mhm. Again, this is a great NPC spell for when you do have your ethos cultists or mythos cultists that are running around. This is what they're going to be spamming. Because who doesn't want more horrific monsters around here? Okay, any more favorite spells? Okay, we could be talking about
Yes.
this.
So,
Okay.
Damnation
Uh-huh.
is actually a good spell, in case the name is throwing you off, and it's the most judgmental spell of all time. Basically, if you have memorized or have access to or have had an evil spell cast upon you, basically any commitment to evil magic means that you take a D8 of damage per level of the spell effect on you. And so if you are a high-level caster who's really committed to that high-level evil spell, a third-level cleric or a third-level inquisitor can just, like, smack you down with righteous vengeance.
That's pretty great. So, you know how we were talking about consent? One spell for me that is the most squick spell, like, I would not be okay with this spell being played whether I was GMing or playing. Vile Dog Transformation. So
Go on.
Vile Dog Transformation lets you target one or more dogs that you touch, and those dogs mutate into basically hellhounds. What's worse is that, like, the dogs are allowed to have a saving throw against the spell, unless the dog has like, they can attempt if they want to, but if they're trained for a specific purpose by you, or they've been in your care for 30 days and generally trust you, they take a penalty on the save against the spell. And so basically, it gives them like breath weapons, and it makes them into hellhounds. But when the spell ends, the dog immediately dissolves into a stinking pile of gore and bone. Like it
Aw.
kills the dog in the casting.
Yeah,
Like
that's
that-
a quick spell.
It's
Don't
a
trust the
super
dog.
spell. Yeah, I can't even. It's not an Alex spell.
Before we move on, I've looked up the etymology of decollate. So collate means to bring together.
Okay.
And so you are unbringing together by decollating something.
That's awesome.
I wanted to.
So,
Okay.
oh, I was gonna move on to the next thing. If you're still going with
I
spells,
was going
go
to
for it.
move on to the next thing, but I want to, like, yeah, for anybody who reads the Paizo books, they always have like a little in-character moment on the chapter headers, and this one I want to kind of read off because it's horror rules, and it's we're finally going to get to see the Estra get her moment to shine here, and I just love this one. I'm going to read it. Basically just verbatim. Come now, child. Estra raised a hand ready to cast a spell. Stop this nonsense at once. Nonsense, the ghost's features contorted in rage. Behind her, trees stretched forth branches like claws. They burned my forest, fed my children to their mills. Estra patted the air. Yes, and that's all very sad, but you're dead, child. In this world belongs to the living. It's time to move on. With a scream, the dryad pointed all around, trees uprooted, and began marching towards the intruders. Estra sighed and turned to the phantom behind her. Honier, be a dear and teach her what it really means to be dead. Miss Ori is saying that we have to rename the other spell to Kick Puppy.
Oh, if you were only kicking the puppy.
You're dissolving the puppy into goo.
But they are right though, because it definitely fits into the trope kick the dog.
Oh, totally.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving on to occult rituals, I really like that they put these in the same chapter as spells.
You skipped
That just seems like it. No,
Okay.
I'm not. Am I?
You skipped
That's
the
where it's
curses.
next, right? Did
no,
I?
no, Param, you skipped forward. There's
Oh,
spells,
okay.
and then there's occult rituals, and then there's horror rules.
Yes. Sorry,
So
I skipped occult
Alex is
rituals.
just jumping back.
Back to
Aha!
back to spells. Occult rituals.
Sort of. Well,
Go for it.
I mean,
Alex.
like, they're really cool, and they do a lot of really awesome, creepy occult things. Like, one of them is basically you make two twins fight to the death, and then if the one that survives, the other one becomes his phantom, and he turns into a spiritualist, which is pretty horrific, but also great. I like occult rituals, and they feel enough like spells that I was happy to see them put in the spells chapter. I think that's a cool choice, and I just wanted to call out that I liked it. But the rituals in this one are all really creepy. One of them is shrouds the land in eternal darkness. I
thing to have
really
around.
liked it. Dude, you always want to shroud the land in eternal darkness. There's another one.
Had it coming.
It did. It totally did. There's another one where you can corrupt a piece of art, which transforms it into one of those things whose name I can't pronounce.
That's
It's
a
all
lot
you
of
write.
things.
The French thing
the
in
art
this book.
creature in the back of the
Oh,
book.
the trompe d'oeil.
No, that.
Yeah. See, Param, doesn't that just hurt your tongue hearing
Yes,
you say it?
totally. Yeah, it's like I coughed.
So, to break it down, trompe means to trick or make a mistake,
Okay.
and d'oeil just means to see or the eye. And so it's just a trick of the eye. That's what a trompe d'oeil literally means. But in the case of the monster, which we'll get to, it's actually a construct that is hiding in a painting.
We will get there. But Param, I know you've wanted to talk about these for so long. Please, let me step off the soapbox and give you curses.
Curses! I love curses because that's magic
foiled
that
again.
you hate. All right, so I like that they didn't bootstrap a curse system in place here. This is all supporting the existing rules for curses. So you've got your conditional curse spell and your classic bestow curse spell, and these support those. So the first thing it does is it starts talking about how if you're going to be running curses in a horror game, you probably want them to not just be able to be remove cursed, and then you're done. You can't just throw a spell slot at it and be done with what's supposed to be a RP opportunity. But they also say that if you're going to do any of that nonsense, to do it exceedingly sparingly. Because if you do that over and over and over again, it's no fun for nobody. And it kind of ruins the flavor of the game. It dilutes what the curses really are. It just frustrates everybody. So what they do is they start outlining, this is in general what a curse can do. It can no worse than 50% chance of losing actions, a -4 penalty on checks, a -6 penalty to ability scores, and so on. And then it says, and along those lines, here's some other effects that could mean, such as, this is one of my favorite. The victim is adjacent to an area of damaging spell or spell effect. The area automatically expands to include them. so just like some creative things to like add it to not just pure stat effects and stuff. And then they start going into the new curses themselves. So these are ones that you can throw this curse out when you're using your curses, either using bestow curse or conditional curse. And there's things like haunting, and this is fun because that's just a campaign thing. There's 3 of them. There's haunts minor. There's Haunt Minor, Haunt Major, and then Hunt of the Boogeyman. And Hunt of the Boogeyman is my favorite because it's the one that has the piece of art with Yoon in it. Art, Yoon, and the Boogeyman.
Yes.
So basically how this works is you're not even supposed to know you've got this. You're not even supposed to know you've got cursed yet. And every day you make a will save against the curse. And every time you succeed, the next will save is at -1. So eventually you're going to fail it. And when you fail it, usually...
We just lose Param?
Hey!
Did we?
Hey, you said usually you fail it, and when you fail it, and
Okay,
then
so yes.
froze.
Usually when you fail it, what will happen is X number of miles away, your ghost or the boogeyman. I like to put one that has, it's like literally the boogeyman. See stats on this page, Bestiary 3, page 42. So you have the boogeyman, spawns X number of miles away, and then over the course of 2d12 hours stalks your character, waits for the perfect time to ambush and try to kill them. So just every so often, it's a random encounter that's reliable.
Oh, but the best part is that the curse revives the boogeyman.
Yes!
Like, you can kill it all you want. It's gonna keep coming back.
The ghosts do that on their own, they reform itself, but like the boogeyman, even if you kill the boogeyman, they're coming back. These things, you've got to deal with this. And it's probably going to take them a few times to figure out that something is wrong. Yes, Scott, the CR10 Fae. That's the boogeyman. There's lots of other rules. They also got rules for like the spontaneous curse, like on my deathbed I curse you, which is basically saying that they're allowed to do that. If you have X number of ranks in knowledge, religion, or arcane, you have the ability to, on a massive, huge moment of stress or torment or death in your life, you can throw out a curse, and this can happen no more than once a month. So if this happens more than once in somebody's lifetime, I'd be surprised.
Or it's even like in like any horror movie ever where somebody dies and like they say, "I'll come back and get you," and then the kids go home and they think everything's okay, but then a monster starts following them because they're all cursed, and it's going to keep following them as long as they're marked, and it's going to get them, and it's great.
It's good. They also have some advice on creating new curses. Things like make it logical, make it interesting. Just the same things we were basically discussing here in a bit more detail. Basically, make it fun and don't overuse it.
I love how one of the things about breaking curses says you may be tempted to kill yourself. Not all the gods think that's cool, and they might be upset that you're committing suicide. It's like, oh, death might not even spare you.
Oh, well, not to mention it might not even get rid of it.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so great. And then there's like a list of cool cursed items, and then the cursed land rules.
Oh, I love the cursed land rules.
They're so cool. You basically get like all of these regional curses that affect the area, and if you walk into the area, you have to save or bad stuff happens to you, and it's great.
And they do this. There's also the hazards that come up later in the book that also are like, this area is not just haunted, like haunts is one way. There's also just, this is a horrible condition this land is under, such as fog that constantly takes over an area, and if somebody dies in it, it automatically revives them as a zombie.
And yeah, there's unseasonable weather. There's all sorts of wonderful jealous structures. You basically have the house from Monster House. It's great. Oh man.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't enough, they have templates for curses, Param.
Templates. Yes, I forgot about it. Yes. Oh gosh.
Yes, it's the Freddy versus Jason curse, Justin, for that one. It's great. But like for the curse templates, you can make a curse generational. So like the curse spreads throughout your family and only manifests itself every few generations. You can make it contagious, so it'll jump to other people. You can take any curse in this book or any other book and make it a death curse, so that when like a hag or a fae or even a Lenorm dies, you just get hit by the boogeyman curse.
Oh.
I'm sorry, this stuff makes me giddy. I love this. Like the GM rules in this book are fantastic. Like 10 out of 10 stars.
This is the
like,
best section of the book. Chapter 5 is the best chapter in this book.
Should we talk about diseases next?
Yes, of course. There's horrible diseases. Basically, they're templates that you give existing diseases that modify them and make them terrible. So you don't invent new diseases. This is a disease you give. This is templates that you put onto existing diseases to make them into something horrific, such as incurable is the one it leads off with. You can't get rid of it. Like, what does it take to get rid of this? Wish.
Or miracle, yeah. It's great. I mean, it makes the disease easier to like live with. The save DCs go down by 5, but who cares if they're going down? You're never getting rid of it.
Right. Speaking of never getting rid of it, the next one is lethal, in which basically it makes the saves horrible, and eventually it's just it increases the damage it does, so that this one's going to definitely kill you if you keep it. Magic resistant, lingering, plague. If you want this thing to be a plague, it's going on. Oh man, this is great. I love the templates more than the diseases. They do have some new original diseases. Brain moss is probably my favorite. You get a brain mold, and it affects how your character acts. Including inside combat, you can just sort of just stare there for a while because there's.
Well, what's really nice about the new diseases is that they all use the disease template from Unchained in terms of like the more like as things progress, this is what happens. They get worse and worse, like the stages. I really like that they brought that back. That was a good idea, and it really needs to be used more.
Yes, just like the monster templates from Unchained, Paizo, those need to be used more.
This is true.
Oh, all right. Then we get into the hazards, which is we just talked about those. Animated fog, blood moon. These aren't curses. This is just like supernatural badness that is just in an area. It's just some rules for that stuff. One of my favorites is bottomless pit. You can actually have one. You fall forever if you fall in this pit. Like it even says, since you're falling forever, you can even do things like get rest and prep spells.
Or take sanity damage from going insane for falling forever.
Oh, of course, there's the sanity damage that you're going to take. But hey,
I like Apocalypse Fog.
This will really test the old adage: it's not the fall that kills you.
I really like the Apocalypse Fog one, the where it just spawns zombies that come shambling out of this horrific fog.
There's just so much good stuff in that section.
Yeah. Corpse Fruit Tree is another great one. They're all so simple, but they're all so menacing that it's wonderful.
A creepy doll. There's a creepy doll.
There is a creepy doll
because there has to be a creepy doll one. It's called Watchful Doll. It's CR1. It basically does nothing other than creep your characters out. Basically, if there's a bunch of dolls in the room, and they will all turn their heads to follow you, and then sometime randomly while you're in the room, they'll laugh, and once they laugh, you have to make a will save or become shaken. That's all it does.
Yes.
But it's enough to add some thick atmosphere onto a thing. Especially like if you throw this in with like some of the creepy doll monsters that are out there. Those are great.
Yes.
I gotta
And then-
say, I kind
Go
of
ahead.
hope that hazards replace haunts because I think the flavor is a little more versatile and the mechanics are a lot simpler.
Well, there are totally new haunts in this book, but I think they could stand to like mix it up a little more.
Yeah, because with the Watchful Doll, you don't know if that's a haunt and you have to bring in the Exorcist, or if it's just something weird going on and you just gotta like grit your teeth and deal with it.
Only Monica would want one of those dolls.
Oh man, I want to do that next time I use an attic whisperer.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Um,
especially if you use a couple of rooms with Watchful Dolls and it just becomes the norm, and then one of them attacks.
Right. So like the next couple like page and a half is all about the different curse domain rules if you're using that subsystem we mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of like special geography and curses that you can put on the area that aren't necessarily like, oh, you walked into an area and now you're cursed with leprosy or whatever. It's like, here's a dread fog, the land is haunted. This entire area is disturbing to animals and they all flee it, so there are no living animals here. It's really cool and it's really creepy. And it's honestly a lot of set pieces, but it's a good thing to call out for that theme.
And a lot of that is actually tying into something they provide in this book, but don't explicitly call out. That is the rules to support off-brand Ravenloft.
That's true.
Yeah, because there's a lot of those in here. There's those realms, and then there's the Dreadlord in the bestiary, where we're gonna like the Dreadlord template you can give, and basically you between that and the hazards and the domains and stuff, you can have your generic brand Ravenloft.
So did you guys see the horrifying traps in this book?
No, actually, I didn't pay any attention to those because I guess I just got attracted right into flesh wrapping.
So there's a trap. It's called the Faceless Statue Trap.
Mhm.
And for some reason, it appears like a page earlier. It's the one where Quinn is stone and has no face. So, like, basically, it hits you with flesh to stone. And if you get petrified, then it hits you with stone shape, and it completely gets rid of your face. And so, if you are hit with stone to flesh, the deformities are still there, and you basically can't see, can't hear, can't do anything, and die of suffocation because you no longer have air holes. Unless you can get hit by a regenerate spell before you suffocate.
That's terrible.
It's wonderful. It's so evil, and I love it. And then there are rules for nightmares. It's like the chase rules, but it's all in your mind.
It's a great way of putting it.
I like nightmares, so I'm cool with that. But the next page is flesh warping.
This is creepy.
So you know
Oh,
what?
it's
Had
so
they
creepy.
just called this mutations, it wouldn't be nearly as creepy, and players would be trying to figure out how to get them themselves. But once you call it flesh warping, and it just starts feeling human centipede-ish.
Well, it spends,
Yeah, but,
it spends 2 whole pages talking about the horrific, painful, body horror, psychological breaking method that you obtain them.
I mean,
Yeah.
the first page is Setio getting ripped apart by Diro. So, yeah, I don't know if any player's ever going to want these.
Yeah,
It's got a nice enough bonus.
It's like to get this, you don't get these on purpose. People do this to you. It's like a horrible. It's human centipede's right. This is like torture porn that results in extra natural attacks.
And with that, Monica wants it to bring up the word consent again.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought that kind of went with as soon as we mentioned torture porn, though. But yeah, I mean, like this is part of the creepiness of the game. But, like things like replace your eyeballs with antennas.
And you get
Ooh.
blind sight out to 30 feet. I mean, I wouldn't mind blind sight.
But you lose
I
normal
would mind.
sight.
Yes, but there are spells for that.
You can
Actually, I don't think there are spells that give you normal sight.
I can't
No,
think of
now that you
anything.
mention it, there's probably more spells that give you blind sight.
I'm
than
sure
there
we
are
can.
spells
Well, we can
sight.
just go back to the torture porn table and surgically graft some eyeballs onto something else.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so creepy,
terrible.
and like,
And at the very end, it says, "Oh, these can also happen as mutations."
yeah.
Yep.
And then
Oh,
speaking of mutations, there's um, the giant chart of random mutations, and none
Yep.
of those are fun. It's things like weeping sores and deformed legs. Oh gosh, ugh. This is your body horror section. When you want body horror, there you go. There you go.
It's for you.
Ugh.
So how about the new haunts, Ryan? Since you seem super pumped about them.
I have no feelings about the new haunts. Haunts are something that I just thought was too specific right from when they were first created, and I've never been enthusiastic about them.
I'm cool with any haunt that lets me accidentally wish for a tsunami of beer, though.
I like the elusive haunt rules so that you can actually like make your haunts more complicated. Because what elusive haunt does is let you have the haunt in one section, but the actual like thing that's causing it somewhere completely different. So like and that's how I would think about it. It's like none of these haunts go away until you can find the dead widower and bury his body. Like that's how
You
it
mean-
works.
You mean like every single supernatural haunting in
Exactly.
the supernatural series?
Exactly. It's like, you still have his high school ring that he had when he was in the car crash. That's
I think
what's
I just have
causing
so
all of
many-
this.
I have bad taste in my mouth from haunts that are like, if you find this body and you bring it to this specific river that has never been mentioned before in the adventure, and you do this ritual that you have no way of knowing about, that gets rid of the haunt. And it's like, no, this was a storytelling opportunity that you just made an impossibility because the story is so far removed from everything else that's happening.
Well, that's one legit criticism about a lot of the Pathfinder adventures is like they have these really deep backstories the players will never find out because they don't provide ways for the players to find out some of them. But that's just a thing. They also have the latent haunt, which is great because it's you got haunted. When you set a certain number of conditions, it'll trigger. We can handle this in a week or two. You become the center of the haunt.
Yeah. I like how there are haunts that pretty much. Go ahead.
Monica's also she's mentioned my other problem with them is that you throw a cleric at them and they're over, which kind of ruins the storytelling potential. And if you don't have a cleric, they're never ending. Mm-hmm. It's just too
true.
Specific and vague, and it's like it bothers me that as many times as haunts have been re-explored, they've never been corrected.
Mm-mm.
Even this one, it adds a lot of variation to the haunts. A lot of the ways they manifest are clever because a lot of times you can just walk around them. But these ones actually, like the scratching behind the wall, I know if I put that into an adventure, my players would want to figure out what it is. And when they found out it's just ghost scratches and there's not actually someone to save or a monster on the other side of the wall, that I can see. Like that creates a scene, that creates a good moment in the adventure. Whereas a lot of them are just like a resource drain or just kind of a nuisance sometimes, or an unsurmountable hurdle. And
Right.
it's just like haunts are unreliable in how they'll be implemented, and it frustrates me.
Did you see how they have like variant haunts, like the magic scars and the psychic haunts?
Yes, and again, like they're opening things up, but I don't know if it fundamentally fixes problems that I have with haunts.
But I like some of the haunts.
Okay,
Haunts is fun, but it's kind of. I think what
focus on
Ryan
the
is saying
positive
is
then.
Haunts is stealth. It's fun, we all like it, but it doesn't actually work like we think it works.
yeah,
That's
okay.
true. But tsunami of beer. Come on. Your
Listen,
haunted.
tsunami of beer are great, but if it was a tsunami of beer was a hazard, that would work just as well and be a lot easier to deal with.
Tsunami of beer. All right, let's go with the madnesses then.
All
I'm
right.
the only one enthused about haunts.
I like them, but I just agree that they're too easy to get rid of, which is why you ban clerics.
Or you just make all of your haunts the ones that are like elusive.
Or unyielding, so that I'll come
or
back.
really tied into the adventure so that the characters are motivated to figure it out because they're like, okay, so this is happening, and I remember hearing or reading about this other character that I kind of sympathized with, and now I think this haunt is related to that other character, so let's explore the haunt while also having to deal with the haunt trying to kill us or nuisance us or whatever.
Right, because if the haunt is your only...
You deal with it in a way that makes sense with the story that's been told, and then everyone's happy. That's a great haunt. That's not how haunts are written.
Yep. Madnesses.
Sorry.
Madness!
Okay, so
Yeah,
this is the weird thing. After reading the madness section, I still don't know why the sanity section isn't just here.
Yep.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Because it's just like it's flipped back and forth. The only way you get these madnesses normally is through the sanity rules or by failing saving throws if your GM decides, hey, you just suddenly get one. And that's how it works. But basically, they're split up for no reason. But besides that, there's the 16 madnesses divided up into lesser and greater madnesses. Just to run through them, the lesser madnesses are delirium, delusion, fugue, hallucination, mania, melancholia, night terrors, paranoia, and phobia. And then the greater madnesses are amnesia, catatonia, cognitive block, dissociative identity, psychopathy, psychosomatic loss, and schizophrenia. And they provide.
I like that we've got randomness charts because in Carrion Crown, there is one of the books will literally drive your character mad, and my character Walter did actually succumb to a madness, and I don't think there were any rules for how to randomly determine what madness there were, so we had to improvise something, and I ended up having split personality disorder, which ended up being a great time. But this one's it's cleared that up. I like this for the same reason I like the fear stuff from earlier in the book. It takes something that exists, adds a few more rules to it, but it doesn't feel like the rules are bolted on. It just feels like they are reintegrating new rules based on the old rules. They're integrating new rules into the system, but also reintegrating the existing rules into those rules.
I don't like phobia being a madness. This is what I've been saving since chapter 1.
Okay, why do you not like phobia being a madness?
Because it simplifies a very realistic mental thought process into a rational mechanical benefit. Like, if anything, this is like extreme phobia, but if phobia comes in like layers. Like, I am completely terrified of heights, but it's more to the point where, like, if I have to be up high, I won't look down, or I won't put myself into a position where, like, I have to be on heights. It's more of, like, an avoidance thing rather than I'm going to run away in fear. And because I'm afraid of heights, I don't really like the label that I have a madness. Like, that makes it sound like I'm, like, hallucinating things or, like, I have amnesia. Like, I don't think those two are on the same level, and frankly, I think it's a little insulting.
Well, all of these are kind of a little insulting
Yeah.
because everything in this book is like real mental disorders that people actually struggle with. So like, you know,
I don't know about everything in this book. There are a couple in this section, I'll agree.
well, I meant the madnesses.
Yeah, sorry. So the madness rules are probably the most real-world horror. Horror is not a fair way of saying it, but like things that will make you uncomfortable. This is actually drawn from reality, but also drawn from how these illnesses were treated when we had medieval technology. Like, you were just a plague upon your community, and that's why it's kind of thrown in as like, oh no, he's the one that's afraid of going too high. He's like, he can't be trusted because of it, and he's probably got demons in his brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
I'm not saying that's exactly how the book justifies it, but that is kind of the reality of that historical period. Having a mental illness was completely debilitating for you, both socially and, well, no, more socially than anything.
I can't speak for the other ones because obviously I don't have things like schizophrenia. But to me, it feels like somebody who does not have phobia designed phobia. Well, and it's a little weird.
I imagine anybody reading these that is suffering from any of these conditions would feel the same way about their condition.
I think you're probably right.
And
if there's rules for having a a bum leg, and if you are actually lame in real, the Oracle curse of being lame. Like if you actually do have a lame foot, that's kind of insulting that you are equivalent to a curse, or not a curse, but is it a curse?
It is a curse.
Yeah, it is a curse. Yes, sometimes the real world is not portrayed very complimentary in the rules.
But you can tell when somebody comes to your table and they've got a bum leg or a physical handicap that's obvious. They're going. These mental illnesses have stigmas, and they will. Then there's every bit of chance that if you have somebody at your table, they might not or will not tell you that they are suffering from these things.
And
so
it's
you're
not
dealing
just
with
that.
it.
Like when you're talking about having a lame curse as an oracle, it's like, oh no, it's a curse, but like it implies that something beyond your control gave it to you, and on top of that, you get a mechanical benefit for having that lame leg. Like
Eventually.
this is just like, this is a negative thing, it's put on you, and a lot of them come up in ways that don't make sense. Like it's like, oh no, I've seen a dead body, I went over my sanity threshold, now I have a phobia of dead bodies. Like that might make sense, but not every application of the phobia is going to make sense. And it sort of takes the idea that like phobias are things that people actually, or any of these mental illnesses really, are things that people actually live with, and instead makes them like, oh well, you obviously were like, saw something traumatic for you to have a phobia, or obviously you took a lot of sanity damage from like waltzing with Cthulhu or something. It's
Under the sanity rules, Cthulhu shows up, you're done. I mean, that's
Yeah,
it. Like
that's
it's
true.
it. You're done.
But it's more like along the lines where like if you take them and make the mechanic that's inflicted on you by something happening, that in a weird way almost makes it feel like they're not something that you would ordinarily have. It makes them feel weird and abnormal, if that makes sense.
It does, and go ahead.
Yeah. And it's like, and if your next sentence is going to be, it is abnormal to have a phobia, that's very ableist.
No, that wasn't my next sentence. My next sentence was going to be, this is actually consent in action. Like, we've talked about some terrible things up till now in the book. This is not something I would have expected to, don't mind the term, trigger this reaction from you. And this is why it's important to discuss the kind of things that you might be having to deal with if you are running a horror adventure.
I understand that there has to be rules for... You've got to be a way to roleplay this out, but... again, you got to handle this one a little bit carefully.
I could see it more along as it's like, oh, you have a madness. Let the player pick which madness they get and how it manifests
itself.
itself.
Pick a lesser or pick a greater, and then talk about it. And yeah, that makes more sense.
I don't know
usually
if it makes more
these things
sense, but that is a great way of compromising. Like that's,
Yeah.
like you, Alex, if this came up in a discussion about how horror would be implemented, you could say you've got a little bit of sensitivity to how madness is portrayed in the rules, but you're not completely against using madness rules, just that if it does happen, as long as you've got a little agency over how that affects your character, then everyone's good. And it's just a matter of finding the compromise that works for you and your group and your GM.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's, you're right. This is how this whole book goes. It's compromises and agreements and talk and discussion.
Whew. So, wow, we sort of just opened the next chapter, didn't we?
Yep. Running Horror Adventures, another great chapter in this book. This is the advice section. This is where
Anyone else find this very late in the book for this?
It's usually late in the book.
Okay.
This is where they always put it, like right before the magic items and monsters.
So, if it were me, I would have done like, because of how it was in Mythic Adventures. Mythic Adventures, like how to run the adventure, actually came before the magic items and stuff. They put all the player options first, and then they had the how to run the game. I would have put all the player-based stuff in the front, and then had this divide the player content from the more GM stuff. But that's just, again, something I would have done.
So basically, make it like a tiny little core rule book. Yeah.
Well, no, like just
go ahead.
I mean, like hey, in the front, like chapter 1, chapter 2, feats, class features, other things that are applicable to players. And then starting with chapter 3, for instance, it's like how to run a horror adventure. Everything after this point is the GM stuff. Like the back of the book is for the GM. Sort of like how when you had the old 3.5 handbook, you knew that after a certain point, like you should just stop looking there because that wasn't your turf anymore.
Now, how would you deal with things like feats? Would you have 2 feat chapters, one of them with monster feats in the later half, one of them with more player options?
I think I would have personally. I don't know if that would have been great in terms of, like, I mean, like, imagine like if the curse section had the curse feats in that section, or like feats that pertain to haunts were in that section. Like, it's something that I think would have made it a little bit more intuitive.
Well, one of the things they could
And
have
that's
done.
exactly right. Oh, go ahead, Perm.
One of the things they could do is, like, not every section is going to be a clear divider. Like, the feats is going to be one that's for both, and the spells will
Yeah.
be for both. But they could, like, if for sections that aren't clearly intended in a book, this is the players for player section, this is for GM section. They could just have like a little icon in the player section that's just like a little badge, and then in it is just a random icon going dink. And this is for players. And then, like, when you get to the GM section, it's like a different little color badge, and it's like one of the main iconic villains from the APs going.
It's all of them are the iconic anti-paladin. It's just him over and over again.
Yeah, it's just kicking
So you
that
want
pig
this-
over and over again for the entire book.
So you want this to be like the spiciness of a menu item.
I think
Right.
that it could. I think it could help, but honestly, I think the book also reads fine the way it is. It's just me thinking, like, how could this have been organized to be a little more intuitive?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think the book reads fine the way it is. I thought we'd made that point really
No,
early
we
on.
don't.
That this is a weirdly ordered book,
Right.
which is not a reason to reject the book outright. It's just strange.
Alright, so the first thing that it does is in the running the section. The first thing it addresses is, hey, what we were talking about. If you're Pathfinder heroes, you don't get horror, so you're going to have to make changes to your base assumptions for your characters. And don't play characters that are immune to horror and ruin everybody else's fun. You signed up for scary chainsaw tentacle monsters from space, so you're going to play scary chainsaw tentacle monsters from space, and don't make them immune to tentacle chainsaws. And then it goes into the page of talking about consent that we've gone over. It goes through, basically, we've gone over this now, but not to the extent that we will go over it when we talk about it with Monica as a guest. Basically, we've talked about it, and then it starts breaking down. Here's the various genres of horror stories and how you can run them, and that's where I think
Oh,
this
that's
really
so
shines.
good.
It's like, here's the monsters that work well with this. This is the sort of challenges that you're going to play. This is the aspects that you should upplay. Like, if you're going to be running a body horror thing, make sure that you don't go into gruesome discussions too often, or else you're just going to make it mundane. Just a little bit of creepiness every now and then is enough to make them squirm even more. Like, if you just, like, one of the things I would do is, like, if you just describe, like, something bumpy moving up a character's skin across his arms and knuckles and into his wrist, and then you just leave it at that. And that's a good body horror moment right there, that you don't have to discuss the freaking spider bursting out of the skin and pulling the sinew and the tendons from the back of those wrists.
Yeah.
That was really, really in depth, Param. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, honestly, like, so, one of the things that they talked about a lot, they being the designers, is that this chapter was written by Wes Snyder, and you can just feel the man's, like, brilliance for the horror genre in this chapter. Like, you just want to bring it close and lap up, like, the horror. It's like, oh, this is so well done. Look at all of the amazing advice. It's really good. There's even, like, a sidebar about what points are often too far when you're trying to scare your players and characters.
Oh, those are
Like-
super. Yeah, we need to call that out and just list them out. Where we're talking about consent. Honestly, this should have been over at the consent section, I think. The going too far
Once
section.
again, this chapter and the first chapter, weirdly similar. Weird that they're not the same chapter.
It's like going too far, and it basically says don't fake emergencies, don't invoke people outside the game, don't touch your players, and don't use costume. This one doesn't fit with the others. Like all the others are this. You would be a horrible person doing the first three, and the second one is don't use costumes or makeups. It can get silly.
Yeah. That one I'm like, why? That could be kind of cool now that you mention it.
But
I
this,
see why
okay,
not
it
the other
says
one.
costumes and fake blood are distractions. If a GM tries to make yourself creepy, it might work for a minute, but most games run a lot longer than that. And after a while, the proper special effect becomes commonplace or worse, just silly. And we all know that, as this describes it, the little breaks in humor destroy horror games because that's what we use to release the tension. And if you release the tension, you're not keeping it and you're ruining the fun for everybody else. So do not
Right.
make your Monty Python jokes when you're playing the horror adventure. Like, don't keep yourself from doing that sort of stuff. The easy way out. Don't go out of character.
Yes. Or if you are gonna make comments out of character, just try to put a hold on the silly. Like, you know, it might be nice for you to relieve the tension, but like you're not helping anybody.
Right. And it's hard. It's so hard to
this-
come back into the tension too. Like if
It
you give
is.
breaks and you have to come back to it, like they're going to completely decompress. When you say 5 minute break and then everybody goes out to like smoke or talk or whatever it is they do during the 5 minute breaks for them, that's when like, oh my gosh, how are you going to get this up? And a lot of GMs complain about cell phones at the table and people being distracted. That will kill a horror game. Like no Candy Crush when you're freaking hiding from your life from the stupid clown flesh monster.
Wonder if
Yeah.
you can find like coffins that you ask your players to put all their cell phones in and just leave it in front of them. Like a tiny miniature
God.
coffin, not actual, not
I
actual
don't,
coffin.
I don't know how I would feel about that personally. I use my phone to look up rules a lot when I'm
Yeah.
both a player and a GM. So
I think it's just
I mean
more
that's just
of-
me.
Yeah, if you
But the uncertainty of even the rules, Alex, adds to the horror.
honestly, taking somebody's cell phone in this day and age is actually disconcerting. We've become so psychologically dependent on these devices. Our brain development has changed because we have these devices in our pockets. That removing them can automatically put somebody in a state of anxiety if you remove access to the device. So that might even
What if
help
it's-
there, but again, that's a consent thing.
Yeah, all right. Anything in particular stand out besides just advice from a student of the genre?
I thought the rules on improvisation was pretty cool. It gives you like advice for like how to adjudicate being buried alive or burned at the stake or being in a burning building. Like it's all really cool. I'm not sure if I would have preferred actual rules, but saying how to make old rules fit this idea I think works a little bit better, honestly, because then you're just not adding unnecessary rules to the game. I think that
Right.
rules work. Yeah.
And the more you're aware of the rules, it's like realizing that the monster is just a guy in makeup in a movie. No, you want to look at that guy and be like, they burned that actor. That's what his face is really right now. So
Yeah.
rules is like bad special effects, basically.
Yes.
And so the more you can just kind of blend it in and make it seem supernatural, not supernatural, but very, very natural. Let's just say natural. There's no reason to modify the word
Natural.
natural. Yes.
Indeed.
The more natural you can make it seem, the better.
So you guys ready to move on to the magic item chapter?
It's kind of
Yeah.
become a thing where we barely talk about magic items. It's just not.
So if
Okay.
you've
Do
got
it.
ones you
There-
like,
No.
No.
we can move
Okay,
on
but-
to it. But like me and Ryan
If-
never get engaged with these chapters.
If there was a magic item that was like, hey, this helps you deal with corruption, I would have been interested, but there really isn't. Like, to me, that just, it seems like it would have made sense. You have the magical good luck amulet that helps you keep your werewolf tendencies at bay or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that just seems like such a huge part of the genre that's missing. But, yeah, the possession items for magic are kind of cool, like possessing objects, but there's nothing that I really want to focus on.
There's one thing I do want to point out. Again, goes in the creep. I got creeped out most when one of the times when reading this book I got creeped out, which is the detailed rules on how to run the torture objects and equipment.
Ah.
Like that gave me the heat.
Yeah, that was kind of
like
weird.
the heretic's fork, especially, man. That just made me shiver.
So the thing about torture is that unless you're actually dealing consequential damage to your character. If it's really just like you're in pain, pain has virtually no rules or very little rules in Pathfinder, and the character or the player, not that the player should feel like they're being tortured, but they should feel at a risk of loss when a torture situation is coming upon them. So this actually takes the concept of torture and finds ways to actually make it matter to the player.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A magic item I do like. I mentioned this earlier. The cephalopod staff. It's a tentacle staff. At will, you can turn it into a whip and use it as a tentacle instead of the staff. And its top level ability is summon monster 6, but only giant octopus.
I really want to talk about the monsters. Can we please go to the monsters?
Monsters.
This
Mama
this
Ursula wants us
chapter
to call
is
out the
so
needful
good.
doll, but it's a creepy doll. I don't like it. Move on.
It's a
At this
creepy
point,
doll.
there's a lot of doll-related options to Pathfinder.
Mm-hmm.
There
Bestiary.
are.
Yes, so
Sorry,
Horror
creepy
Adventures
doll
is one of the
creeps
few
me out.
non-bestiary books that actually has a bestiary chapter in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not actually that many monsters. I believe there's less than a dozen.
Yeah.
And most are templates.
Well, first is
Yeah,
the
most are
dread.
templates, most have a 2-page spread.
Yeah, it starts with the Dread Lord, which we mentioned, which is basically the file the serial numbers off of Ravenloft.
There's
Then you
only
have
7 monsters.
Then you have the Hive, and I couldn't quite make what figure were they going for, like the Xenomorphs, or were they going
That's
for
the
something
impression I
else?
It's
Because
Zerg. It's
it's like
Zerg.
the Zerg
It's
or
totally
the
Zerg.
yeah, they got the Zerg thing, the Tyrannid from Warhammer, which is what the Zerg ripped off. So it
Well,
could be
like,
that.
think of it. Think of it. It's like the way it works is that if you survive, you get the Zerg corruption, which is totally what happens to the character in StarCraft when she becomes the Queen of Blades.
Which is
Like
also
they are the Zerg.
Yeah.
I thought the Tyranids just killed you and spawned more people with your powers. I didn't think they actually turned you into more Tyranids.
Gene Stealers do.
Okay. See, I
Maybe-
don't know. I'm
That's
not great at Warhammer 40K. That's all Anthony. He's the 40K guy of our team.
Mhm.
I'm
Jay
sorry.
Franklin has posted a link that just says creepy doll, and it's a YouTube link, and I do not want to click on it.
I'm pretty sure that's the Jonathan Colton Creepy Doll song. I don't know for sure,
Oh.
but that's my suspicion.
Possibly. But you know what? All I know is that it's a link that has something to do with creepy dolls.
And we're gonna just leave it there.
That's enough for me. Nope. A lot of nope for you right there.
Right. Then we have that painting thing that we can't say, but Ryan got dead on accurate.
Oh,
He
the
did.
that's right, trompe l'oeil. I keep saying trompe d'oeil, which is trick of the eye, whereas trompe l'oeil is trick your eye, I guess.
Which is
Well, I
a cool.
mean, you also
I
have
think
the turn. Go ahead.
Trompe d'oeil.
You also have the cool turn anybody into a chitin template.
Yeah, the apostle kite.
And no
Okay,
eyes,
you also-
because of course you have no eyes.
Yeah, and
And only getting
you-
eyes.
you
or at
have
least-
the
Antenna.
Freddy Krueger the Freddy Krueger template, the implacable stalker,
Mhm.
the implacable. I have no idea how to say it. I give up, guys.
The waxwork creature is not normally something I consider horror, but the artwork they gave to this one sure freaked me out. Holding it up to the
There's
camera.
been a fair number of
Ugh.
horror movies based on wax.
Well, yes,
wax-
yeah, but.
Valley territory.
And then it goes to the simple templates, which include an issue that you mentioned. Yeah, you got this.
Harem.
Okay.
We can't skip the pseudo Slender Man template.
Oh, I wanted to skip this Slender template.
No.
Okay.
So that word is a French origin, by the way, Alex. So it's implaçable
Okay.
or implaceable. Like that's how you would anglicize that word.
Interesting.
What is that? A soft C?
Yes. So I mean, like, on one hand, I like the unknown. On the other hand, as a diehard Slenderman fan, I kind of don't think it does enough. It doesn't quite get it because, like, Slenderman is equal parts Jason and this template. Like, he's someone you cannot hurt and cannot kill, and just is there all the time and is creepy.
Right. Well, the thing is,
Isn't
like, he's not supposed to
So-
move.
Yes.
But don't we already have rules for Slenderman? I thought they made it into Bestiary 4 or 5.
There was a template, or there was a monster in the Inner Sea Bestiary called Thin Man,
Mhm.
but they were like a weird fae that really didn't have much to do with it.
And that's the only... I really thought there was a Slenderman already
Nope.
by name, because it's not like it's a copywritten name. It was a Reddit urban legend generating thing. I don't remember the exact
and a
origins.
terrifying
but-
video game. A freaking terrifying video game.
Yes.
Right, but didn't it start as like a Reddit thread where somebody was like, let's make a new urban legend and like spread it out there?
Yeah, but the guy who did that ended up claiming copyright on it, so you really can't use the name.
Oh, okay. Is there actually copyright?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There does not seem to be a Slenderman in the PRD. Okay. I stand corrected.
I like the simple templates for simple corruptions.
Yep.
It reminds me of the simple class templates, which I really wish more of them existed.
Which includes a Promethean chimera.
Yes.
Yes. I want a robot dragon, please. Dude, there's a template that you can make anything a lycanthrope. I love that. You want a lycanthrope green dragon? You can do it now.
And then the book ends with the inspirations for the different horror genres. If you want to get some research and/or never sleep again.
Yeah. Would you like to never sleep again?
No, I enjoy sleep.
Param's like, I already don't sleep.
Oh, it's
Don't.
okay, Parent.
Ugh.
Oh.
So we've kind of been all over the place with this because there was definitely some stuff we were super excited about, which I was actually a little bit more surprised because when I put the book down originally, I was like, that was only okay, and I don't even know if it didn't meet my expectations or if there just wasn't that much need for the book. But yeah, no, having gone through it chapter by chapter with you guys, I am starting to see that it's not as lacking as I originally thought it was. I still don't think it's a particularly strong entry in the hardcover line, but as a companion piece for this specific type of adventure, which is what separates horror adventure from occult adventures, which occult adventures is a book that I think anyone could make use out of and really have a good time with it. Horror adventures is really, it's just what it says. It is good for running horror adventures, or at least for if you're ever thought about running horror or adding a little horror to your game, this is the book you need.
I'm actually the opposite. I came in really, really enjoying it, and then you guys kept showing me stuff. I was like, oh yeah, you guys are right. Oh, and so it's like, no, the hype train, it's going down.
Well, that's why
I
it's
mean,
important
overall,
for us to
I-
do this as a group. It kind of kills our
Yeah.
biases.
Yeah, I mean, like, overall, I still really like this book. I like most of what's in it, but I do think that there are some things that just, they don't, like, a lot of the subsystems don't really feel complete. The corruption one is the big one. Actually, I'll spoil this. I'm talking with freelancers to do stuff with corruptions, and I was pretty strongly in the camp of the mechanic is fine as it is, but, like, after talking with you, I'm not so sure if I still have that opinion anymore.
Right.
So... that maybe, yeah.
The mechanic as it's presented at the beginning, where it's something that happens occasionally, that's fine. That's how it should be. It's just that the actual implementation of that mechanic is not as
just
advertised.
the progression section in each of them. It's just too aggressive. I did some math on it, and basically, assuming that you even were lucky and you got it to be your main stat, for the ones that test weekly, the chances that you make it past month 3 start falling into the single-digit percentage chances.
Yeah, I was wondering after 1 month, not month 3.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
There was one line that got skipped over that I do want to go back
Sure.
and just call attention to because it kind of encapsulated the writing of the book that I enjoyed. There we go. In the Shadowbound, they've got the wretched pain manifestation, and it just says inflicting pain is one of the few sensations that still stirs you. And that is exactly the kind of writing that I was enjoying from this book. Again, overall, this book is not as good as Occult Adventures, and the writing did not draw me in as much as Occult Adventures. But every now and then, you were just hit with a really like psychologically kind of disturbing line like this that was just kind of presented as innocuously as anything else in the book, and so you just kind of get like a shiver, like, oh, I just read that.
It's like this book nails the flavor. Like
Yes.
the flavor and the theme, and if all you're looking for is advice and inspiration, this book really hits it. If you're a GM wanting to run a horror game and are willing to take parts of this piecemeal and use for your horror game, or you're going to supplement a horror section to a game, this is great. For GMs, this book is great. It's for when you
Yes.
start talking about it from a player angle. This is like, unless you know you need some very specific options from this, I don't see that this being a very strong player buy. This is straight in the camp, and the player options are going to be in the PRDs anyway. So if you're a player, you kind of don't even need like what this book's strong point is, which is these huge advice sections and flavor sections.
Actually, that does remind me of something we really should call attention to, because we've called out a couple of specific pieces of art that we enjoyed. The art in this book is very strong.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if you go with just the rules on the PRD, you're missing out on some great illustrations. There was one of them, what the spell was, the Screaming Flames. That's something I forgot to call attention to, but the art for that in the spell section, it is after page 125. There we go, page 127. That's just amazing. Like the reds, it's just like dark shades of red in the entire thing. I just like looking at this. It's a captivating image. And so they really did find a lot of really creative ways to make to just torture the iconics, really.
Yeah.
So, what did you think overall of this book, Barum?
I think that it's a great book if you're a GM wanting to run a horror adventure, and like just that's what I think it is. It's got some glaring flaws that become obvious for an experienced person of the game, but those flaws are not enough to discredit the value of the book for a GM wanting to run horror games. For anybody else, like if you're not wanting to run horror games, like you have no interest in horror games, or you only care about character builds, I don't recommend this book. Like this is a book for doing what it was made for, and that's facilitating horror play in Pathfinder.
I think this tries too hard to be useful to players, even though it's kind of admits that it's more of a GM book, but it tries to be a book for GM and players. And because of that, there's a lot of stuff that seems frustrating, because a lot of us look at these books as players. There's more players than GMs, and whenever you open up a new book and you're like, wow, there's this many pages of archetypes, and then after you get through the first few pages, you're like, I have not seen anything that's really applicable to me, or very little.
Yeah.
That's where it kind of like sours what otherwise is probably a 70% solid book. It's
Well-
just that 30% can be kind of frustrating for why it's not as solid.
Well, for first-party products especially, there are more players than GMs, but GMs buy more material than the players. Because if of the people likely to have the large collection in your group, it's likely going to be the person running the games.
Right. And I don't think there's a problem releasing GM books, and I don't think there's a problem releasing books that are for GMs and players equally, or like 60-40 spread. It's just that I think they set out to make this more player friendly than it ended up being. And that's just, I think, like I said early on, that horror is not about the heroes. Horror is about average people overcoming terrible things. And that is not what Pathfinder is.
No. All right. What about you, Alex? What's your final judgment on this one?
I think my number on what's really good and applicable is higher than Ryan's. I'd say about 80% is good and applicable. Definitely to the GMs, if not like. There are some neat things for players that are really cool in this book. The book that I really like, a handful of really awesome archetypes. I think that some of the player racial traits are kind of boring, but mechanically they're all great. It's just like, this isn't a book that really knocked my socks off. It's not Ultimate Intrigue. It's not Occult Adventures. If you're a GM planning on running a horror game, like I'm getting ready to run Strange Aeons, this book is awesome. And I think that's kind of where I came into with this, using it to start prepping Strange Aeons. But with talking with you guys, I think like So yeah, I can see as a player wanting to pass on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'm curious in a year how we're going to look back on Horror Adventures.
I think this will be a book we keep going back to as we need parts of it for our games. Like if I'm going to run like the Evil Carnival section, I'm going to come back here and pull some of this stuff out of it. It's oddly enough, like some of my favorite books that we've reviewed highly, I use less. I don't use Ultimate Campaign as much as I anymore, even though I love that book going through it. And the game mastery guide we gave high marks to, and I barely touch that anymore. But I still pull out things from the other books.
I have a feeling the time it's going to be most used is not going to be for Horror Adventures, but just for making the villains of a campaign. I think a lot of GMs are going to treat those archetypes as like the go-to for making encounters and villains really special. Actually, this is a surprising good compliment for Ultimate Intrigue, where it's talking about villains and rivals and stuff. There's a lot of stuff in this book that works extremely well with those rules.
I'm going to totally be like I have a villain in the upcoming campaign or in the upcoming adventure that's I'm running. That's a vivisectionist alchemist, and I'm going to use those flesh warping rules for all the minions that he's been experimenting on. It's like I want to freak my players out with that, and I was like just like winging it with like custom made critters, but now with these rules it's going to be all that easier to give them like crab hands and things like that.
Actually, the Vivisectionist, I know exactly what you're talking about right away because it's infamous as the villain alchemist archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore. Now there's going to be a whole bunch of other archetypes that go along with the Vivisectionist.
Mm-hmm.
Are we ready to wrap things up?
Yeah, I think we're
so.
ready to end this.
All right, we'll be right back with the shoutouts right after this.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 139 of No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Before we go, just want to bring your attention to some things that might be of interest to you. First of all, Monica is in chat because she wasn't able to join us, but she does want people to know that tomorrow's blog post, which she'll be posting, her Inspire Confidence, part of her Inspire Confidence series, will be about playing evil characters. And that's something that everything I just said about making cool villains also applies. This book will be great to go back for Hell's Vengeance campaigns and other villain or other evil campaigns or other campaigns where you're allowed to play a bit of a villain. You might find more use of those options than people that are running traditional heroic campaigns. I'm also going to bring attention to a book that kind of caught me by surprise because I was a major contributor to it. It is the last book that's in the Four Winds Fantasy Gaming banner. So you'll remember years ago, actually, if you remember our second episode, we interviewed Robert Thompson of Four Winds Fantasy Gaming. They were one of the first third-party publishers of Pathfinder material.
Didn't they put out the very first book that launched alongside the core rulebook?
Yes, I believe Book of Arcane Might is the name of it. And basically, between the core rulebook, between the launch of the core rulebook and the launch of the Advanced Player's Guide, there was this year where basically Four Winds Fantasy Gaming was giving the crunch players their crunch. It was giving you more options than just what we had from 3.5. And unfortunately, they were no longer sustainable after Paizo started putting out more and more crunch-focused books. Like, they kind of lost their niche. And Purple Duck Games purchased Four Winds Fantasy Gaming and continued to publish and release the books that were originally planned. Paths of Power 2 is a book. It collects a series of smaller PDFs of race-based options that have been slowly released for years now, and they're finally collected. It's going for $14.99 on DriveThruRPG. I contributed to the half-elf and possibly the human chapters. It's been a while since I've seen my name as a freelancer. In fact, they've even got me as Ryan Costello Jr., which I have not gone by in at least a couple of years. So yeah, kind of got weirdly nostalgic for something that I did not expect to be nostalgic for. So if you miss my design work and you want to check out some options that I wrote a while ago, you can check out Paths of Power 2, Paths of Blood from Four Winds Fantasy Gaming and Purple Duck Games.
Alex, got
Alex,
anything you
I think people should know. Wow.
I wrote stuff in Haunted Heroes Handbook, which Paizo put out this month. You can check that out.
Yay.
And I put out. I don't know if you guys talked about it. I put out Paranormal Classes. It's kind of like a sequel to a Paranormal Adventures product I did,
No.
where basically everything is cult horror and cult television. It's pretty cool. I teamed up with a local friend of mine. His name is Matt Morris, and we made just so many ridiculous things. We did a witch that controls dolls called the Poppet Witch, and eventually she gets strong enough to turn you into a doll.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Ooh,
So it's-
I've been dealing with creepy
it's-
dolls in Rain of Winter.
Yeah, it's pretty great. There's a bunch of other just really weird things. I wrote a class in a book about a year ago called The Vessel, where it's basically Castiel. You keep an outsider inside you, and the outsider gives you powers. And so this book has a variant on that idea where instead of housing passengers, you get usurped by usurpers, and one of the choices is Yithian. So you play a Yithian that's inhabiting your player character's body. It's pretty crazy and it's funny. I enjoy weird little Yithian things.
Can we just go back to Haunted Heroes Handbook for a second?
Yeah,
As you know, I'm playing a Haunted Oracle.
yeah,
An Oracle of Bones, in fact. How
yeah.
perfect is this book for me, Alex?
You're playing the Bones Mystery, right? You said.
Yes.
I would say 65% awesome, because a lot of it is based around. I'd say there's a lot more emphasis on some of the newer occulty stuff. Like there's a lot of spiritualist stuff. There's a lot of medium stuff. It's more about communing with the spirits than animating the dead. There's a lot of just really cool little bits of information about different organizations. Like I got to write a blurb about a very popular yet secretive branch of the Aspis Consortium, which was fun. I wrote a paragraph about. I wrote actually more than a paragraph. I wrote a lot about the Ride-Through Dwarven tradition, which was also really cool. And I wrote a medium archetype to go with it. It's just it's a neat book. It's got a large spread of stuff. It doesn't really hit any one particular genre of ghosts and spirits. It sort of tries to go after all of them. And it's cool. I think the most popular thing in it was written by Isabel Lee so far. There's a series of feats where your hand gets possessed by a ghost, and as you level up and take more feats, the hand gets more powers. Like one of them gives it skill ranks as if it were intelligent items. Eventually, it can detach from your arm, Vampire D style, and turns into a familiar.
Oh, okay.
So-
I was thinking it was going to be more like Evil Dead 2, where it turns into a villain.
Yeah, it's kind of. My iconic design from last week, the Parasite one, is based on that feat chain. So, yeah, it's a cool book. It's got a lot of just really spooky but not horrific things, I would say. I got to do a shout out to the Carrion Crown Adventure Path. I wrote the ritual that the Whispering Way uses in book 1, but is never given rules. So that was pretty fun.
Oh, that is cool.
Yes.
How about
So-
the cleric spells of a necromantic leaning?
So actually, there's an entire brand new descriptor of spells in the book called Haunted Spells. They're necromancy spells, and all of them basically, when they cast, they linger in an area and work like haunts for their duration. So I know you don't like the haunt rules, but it's really cool.
You might be turning me around on haunts.
There's one. It's called like Bez Samara's Sorrow, where like it does stuff while you're out at the ocean. Like there's a lot of really cool ones. The name of the person who wrote them is escaping me, and I feel really bad because he did really good work in that section. But yeah, the spells are just it's kind of like how when I worked in Legacy of Dragons last month, where I wrote all of these spells that work with dragons in weird ways. This section has a lot of spells that work with haunts and undead forces in weird ways, so I think people are going to like that.
And Param, anything people need to know about?
Yeah, I just got in the cool set of dice that I pledged for on Kickstarter that I kind of wanted to talk about. I don't have the dice in my hands, but I do have a picture of them up, so I'm going to throw that up here. They're from Polyhero, if you've heard of these
Yep.
guys.
I love Polly.
I got the warrior set, and they sent it to me right before Gen Con, and they're really fun because all the dice look like shields and swords and daggers and gauntlets and helmets and stuff. And then they just announced that they're going to be doing a wizard set for casters, and it's like the D4 is a magic missile and the D6 is a fireball. And better in like the potions are 10s, and the scroll is 8, and the wand is 12, and they got a big orby magic orb looking D20. But they also just announced that they're going to be able to buy extra D6s so that when you cast Fireball, you can throw out actual fireballs.
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to need a lot of those. I don't cast Fireball ever, but I want to be equipped for it if I have to.
Yeah, it's cool. I like it.
I mean, you could just run some of the crazy high-level scenarios they do for PFS. When I was running this year's special with no spoilers, one of the monsters is like a 19th level caster who has like, I mean, I only played tier 8, 9, but one of the monsters is like a 19th level caster who can cast Cone of Cold. And so it's just like, everybody freeze.
I will probably buy a lot of those dice.
You can freeze everybody or burn them, whatever you prefer, Perrin.
Ooh.
Burn.
How happy are you with your first set, with your warrior set, Per?
I've been using them as my main dice for a little while to test them out when I'm GMing, and they're really fun. They roll fine. I haven't noticed any bias on the rolls. I was really worried about that with the D20. They had to fatten up the D20 in order to get rid of the bias because they test rolled it a bunch in the original design where it was a really thin shield. It just wasn't working, so they fattened it up. So it looks a little less like a shield, so I'm kind of glad that the D20 looks like a D20 in the wizard set. They just wizard up a D20.
Right, it
Yeah.
looks like a crystal ball or something.
Yeah, and it looks, it looks appropriate, but as far as the rest of them, I love them, like the daggers and the swords. My only complaint, and I think it's one that even they realized too late, is that I'm gonna pull it up on the monitor again. If you look at the D6 is the sword, and the D8 is the mace, they should have swapped those.
Mm.
And that's my only complaint. But otherwise, it's a fun little thing. I love rolling them around.
Actually, you've just reminded me that I did want to point out I actually wrote a blog post today
Woo!
because Easy Roller Dice Company hooked me up with a couple of their sets of dice, essentially for review. So you can check out that review now. But I will give you the cliff notes that Easy Roller makes dice accessories. They say that they're going to open it up to broader gaming accessories and also accessories for teaching professionals. But right now, they're almost entirely focused on dice products, and like they've got dice bags, they've got dice rollers, dice towers, dice carrying tubes. Like basically anything that's ever existed for dice exists from like a version of it exists from Easy Roller. So the main thing they sent me to review were their gunmetal dice, which are they're metal dice, and the claim to fame for the gunmetal ones, and it's hard to see this in most pictures of them, so I thought I took a really creative picture illustrating this, is that these are dark, and so they almost look black at a glance, but up close you can tell they're actually reflective, and that's cool. You're just rolling these like steel, they're not actually steel, but like these balls of mirrors.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was really happy with that set. They sent me a second set, which is more of their like standard dice, and I gotta say, it's the weirdest dice I've ever rolled. They are super light, and the weirdest comparison I can make is also the best comparison. I used to have a ball for my dog called the Unpredictable, and it was basically like a baseball if the stitches were almost half an inch raised off of the ball, and so when you threw it and it bounced, it would sometimes bounce back at you. You can never really predict the bounce. That's how these dice roll, and that is not their gimmick. They're just weird dice. So if you are interested, read the review. I go into more detail. I would recommend the gunmetal dice. I would not recommend their standard dice, unfortunately. They also sent me a reversible dice bag, and that I actually really enjoyed. That one really caught me off guard because I just didn't think I was in market for a new dice bag. So anyway, you can check out the review. It's on the site now. It's the top article until Monica's goes live tomorrow morning.
I bought a set of dice at Gen Con.
Oh, which
what'd
ones?
you get?
I bought these faux metal blood red dice from Chessex.
Uh-huh.
They are pretty cool. They're like actually really heavy. They kind of clunk at the table, and I think you were saying that your metal dice like chip a little bit. Like the paint on these sometimes chips, but it's not bad yet. But as befitting their color, they're the most bloodthirsty set of dice I own. They want they want players dead when they want them dead, and they choose. I doubled my kill count in PFS at Gen Con with them.
Oh,
I
gosh.
killed 3 people
Player?
in 1 weekend. Yes. They just want the blood of PCs, nothing more, nothing less.
Oh, as a GM, bad Alex.
I mean, so it's not my fault that the shadow touched the Kitsune mesmerist who dumped strength and he died, and then someone else ran through the shadow's threatened area and failed the acrobatics check, so the shadow crit touched her and she died in 1 hit too. Not
I'm
my
going to blame
fault.
you.
The
You
dice
bought red
wanted
dice.
her.
You knew what those dice could do.
I mean, it was a possibility, but I didn't think it would actually happen. I own killer dice. It's a thing now. I have to offer them PFS souls.
Since we're on Dice Kick, Bastile's pointed out there's the irregular dice from Impact Dice. They're selling D13s and D15s.
Uh-huh.
I've seen them. They're interesting. I've just never quite understood the appeal of novelty dice because I will never need a D13 or a D15. Except if I'm running a horror adventure and I just want to unsettle my players, I'll secretly swap their D12s for D13s. So that they suddenly roll a 13 on when they think they're rolling a D12. Oh, except nobody rolls D12s. My plans are ruined. He also talks about the dice that roll when you clap. Those are called boogie dice. I've actually had my eye on some boogie dice for a long time. I can't tell you why. But yes, they're chargeable. They've actually got a board game that the fact that they are dancing dice plays into it. But most people seem more interested in the dice themselves. All right. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Thank you, everyone that joined us in chat. Thank you, Monica, for joining us in chat when you couldn't join us live. Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
I'm Alex Sagunas, the Everyman Gamer.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.